Many thanks. And that concludes topical questions. And we'll now move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 5892 in the name of Richard Lochhead on Scottish Government food policy. Can I invite members who wish to speak to press the request to speak buttons at this point? And can I remind members to speak through the chair by referring to other members by their full names and not as you, if that's possible, please. And I would now invite Cabinet Secretary Richard Lochhead to speak to and move motion. Cabinet Secretary, 14 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Today we are discussing food policy, and given that in taking this issue forward I often deal with the James Hutton Institute, can I use this opportunity to say how sorry I am to hear that the Institute has lost two talented and valued colleagues in a recent tragic car accident, as reported in today's news. I know I speak for the whole Chamber when I offer our condolences to the families and friends of Dr Stuart Rind and Dr Julian Dawson, and to all their colleagues at the Institute. Presiding Officer, food is vital to all our lives, our environment and our economy. In the past few weeks, the horsemeat scandal has reminded society of this and has raised awareness of provenance and quality. Consumers are now asking more questions about what's in the products they are buying and about what's on their plate, and that can only be a good thing because Scottish produce competes with the best. Retailers and food service companies should respond by sourcing closer to home, adopting ethical purchasing policies and acting more responsibly. This transformative moment in the food debate should change the way we think about what is on our plate, what we are eating, where it's from and how it is produced. I want, and I'm sure the rest of the Chamber want, Scotland to be a good food nation. In 2007, the Scottish Government started raising awareness of the food debate. Back then, there was no national food and drink policy, and there was no joined-up approach to growing an important industry of huge economic importance. We wanted change. So Scotland's first ever national policy was published in 2009. Since then, the policy has come alive by working in partnership all over Scotland, and we have made a difference. I just want to pick a few quick highlights. Firstly, the sector's economic performance has been truly outstanding. Food and drink companies have not been immune to the downturn, but a sector in 2007 was worth £10 billion is now worth £12.4 billion and has been one of our fastest growing sectors. This is a sector that relies on Scotland's rich natural environment, of course, and back in 2007 there was no environmental strategy for the industry. Last month I launched its first ever environmental strategy, which is an important step forward given the sector's carbon footprint. And while we want Scots to enjoy even more of their own larder, we also want visitors to do likewise. In 2007 there was no focus on food in Scotland's tourism industry. Since then it's featured heavily in the 2009 Homecoming. 2010 was a tourism focus year, and it will be a key theme in Homecoming 2014. And we want our public sector to source quality food from our own country. In 2007, public procurement in our schools and care homes, for instance, was estimated at 34% sourced from Scotland. It is now estimated at 48% across the whole public sector, and that figure is growing all the time. So these are great strides forward, but of course we can't be complacent and there is always so much more to do. But let's consider the bedrock of that fantastic success. This is, of course, the outstanding produce that Scotland is able to offer. Our Scottish beef and lamb, for instance, is second to none, recognised by top chefs everywhere. This meat is traceable from farm to fork, and the Scotch label is a standard bearer for quality. And our seafood from our pristine waters is acclaimed worldwide. Scottish salmon was the first ever non-French product to be awarded the Label Rouge quality mark. And also our soft fruit, cereals, vegetables and potatoes are well known for quality and taste as well. And our Scotch whisky is a global success, shipping overseas an estimated 40 bottles per second. So why would anyone want to look elsewhere for what we can supply? But thankfully, local sourcing and the celebration of Scottish produce is increasing all the time. I have seen this myself. A food revolution is underway throughout this country. And not just in this country, but overseas as well. A recent trade mission to China and Japan gave us an insight into the massive opportunities in these markets alone. As a result, one buyer will now supply Scottish salmon to 90 Michelin and other top-end restaurants in Japan. And an agreement with the World Association of Chef Societies will see 10 million chefs worldwide, 10 million chefs, just to repeat that, worldwide commit to using Scottish langoustine and salmon in their cooking competitions and restaurants. This international success is borne out with the export figures, which are at an all-time high of £5.4 billion. That is up 52% since 2007.
Jamie McGregor.
I thank the Minister for I don't know why I haven't got my card in. For giving me. Could you tell me, is the in order to promote Scottish venison and put it on a level playing field, could you clarify the position regarding single farm payments for Scottish deer farmers?
Cabinet Secretary.
As the member will be aware, we're currently in negotiation over what allowance has been given for Scotland's venison producers, and indeed as part of the new entrance money that we've made available £2 million over the next 2 years. We've also opened discussions with Scotland's deer farmers as part of that debate as well, so they are at the forefront of our thinking. But can I just say, in these immensely important international markets I've just been referring to, provenance and quality really counts. What also counts is well-organised industry that can service customers, and all that needs well-organised public sector support as well. Since 2007, what was a disjointed approach by the industry has changed. The industry leadership body, Scotland Food and Drink, has since delivered real results. Since 2007, what was a disjointed public sector approach has also changed. Scotland's Food and Drink's partnerships with their enterprise agencies are all supporting growth. For example, the UK Market Penetration Project has since 2011 resulted in an additional £5.38 million of sales for Scottish companies involved in that.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I'm slightly curious how he can so easily segue from talking about local procurement and the importance of shorter supply chains into this enthusiastic attitude to globalised supply chains and a globalised control of our food chain by large corporations. Does he have nothing to say about how to roll back the last food revolution when control of our food system was swallowed up by a handful of corporations?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'll be returning to some of these themes, but I would say that even 5 million people in Scotland consume all the whisky we produce in this country, and it's really quite a wise decision to export 90% of the whisky we produce. So we do have to have important export markets that we do have to utilise for the Scottish economy. But I will return to some of the themes that the member raises. Can I just say, though, that we could endlessly debate the food system that does rely on big retailers, and I am the first to challenge them, as I did last summer over milk prices, and as I am doing now over the horsemeat scandal as well. I'm also a strong advocate of the new but long overdue Groceries Code adjudicator, because some retailers do abuse their powers. I accept that, and I'm due to speak to the new adjudicators when appointed very soon. Supermarkets may not be popular with all politicians, but they are with the public, and we need to work with them. They sell most of our food, and they're responsible for around 240,000 jobs in Scotland alone, and these are important jobs. And many retailers are buying produce from Scottish suppliers, and tens of thousands of Scottish jobs rely on those contracts as well. But we do work hard to encourage retailers to increase Scottish sourcing. The sales of Scottish produce have increased by 28%. That's just under £400 million since 2007. And of course, it's not just the retailers who buy and sell food. Food service companies also influence our food supply chains across the public and hospitality sectors. One major food service company recently informed me that they now turn over £60 million worth of products from more than 100 Scottish suppliers, selling to customers right across the UK and Europe. And they're about to invest a further £30 million in Scotland in their infrastructure here over the next 2 years. And whilst retailers and the food service industry provide the products, we also, of course, have to remember the choices that people make are their own choices. These choices have a real impact on our environment and our health as a country as well. And that's why educating our children about food is a passion of mine. But it's not just my passion. Whenever I speak to people interested in the subject, the first priority they always mention to me is teaching young people about food. In 2010, we piloted projects in schools. As a result, we helped at least 800 schools and 55,000 pupils learn about food, with around 500 teachers receiving additional professional development. And last year, I extended that programme with a further £2 million worth of support. And the Cooking Bus has, since 2008, visited 130 schools and community groups and helped 13,000 pupils and 5,000 teachers and community workers learn to cook healthy, nutritious meals. This emphasis on community is key to the food revolution. A key appreciation of local food is at its heart. Thriving local food networks are now emerging right across Scotland. Groups like Savour the Flavours in Dumfries and Galloway, Taste of Arran and Argyll Foods have a business focus to cooperate and promote and sell their outstanding produce. And farmers' markets have boomed, up 50% since 2007, and sales increased from £18 million to £25 million. because local food is fundamental to our reputation, and that's why I recently approved the Think Local project through the Scottish Rural University College, and this targets support to local food companies, networks and communities. And a £1.5 million community fund will promote local food tourism, farmers' markets, food festivals and other community events. And communities want to grow their own food. Since 2007, the Climate Challenge Fund has supported 280 food-related projects with over £16 million. And soon we will consult on allotments legislation to help inform the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill. Affordability of food is also crucially important. Community Food and Health Scotland supports low-income communities, promotes healthy eating and addresses health inequalities, which I know we all realise is a massive challenge. Since 2007, they have received £4.75 million and provided grants to over 250 community projects. They are just a few of the achievements of the national policy. But a key theme is our high standards of provenance, the platform on which our food and drink success is built. This has never been more valuable as we learn from the horsemeat scandal that has rocked Europe. Food fraud in any country is totally unacceptable. Since the policy got underway, I have stressed that we should know where our food comes from, we should value what is on our doorstep, and we should see that food as essential to our well-being, our environment and society at large. The horsemeat scandal has brought this to the forefront. People are stopping, thinking and questioning where their food comes from. It has challenged those who control our food sources to step back and think, as they must now do. Tesco's recent announcement about more UK sourcing is just one example that shows the renewed importance of provenance, although we are all right to ask why they were not sourcing closer to home in the first place. This government acted to restore public confidence and ensure that we did not get complacent. We have worked with the FSA and announced the consultation on the new standards body as well for food, and we commissioned our expert groups also. And last week, ministers met local authority representatives to discuss school meals. School meal standards are high and were set by legislation in 2008. These standards must be met before any tender is considered. Across the Scotland Excel contract, which covers most councils, the total value of frozen processed red meat used in 2012 was £792,000. Compare this to the £3.7 million spent on fresh meat. Of course, we can strive to do more, but we should take confidence in our school meals, where uptake has risen for 3 consecutive years. Very briefly.
Richard Simpson.
Thank you for giving way. Will he consider altering the balance between finance and quality in respect to the meat products contract for school meals?
Well, I think there are a number of important issues in that regard that will no doubt feature in this debate from other members in the Chamber. But Hungry for Success, which was launched in 2003, heralded a revolution in school meals. And now a Still Hungry for Success working group will meet this week to start refreshing the policy. And all members will have their opportunity, no doubt, to put their views into that body. The horsemeat scandal has made us all pause and think. In my view, provenance is the underlining factor. Knowing where your food comes from and taking assurance from high standards. Scotland's high standards are internationally renowned, and there will be even more of this in the future. 2014 is just around the corner, and the eyes of the world will be on Scotland. The next homecoming, the Ryder Cup and the Commonwealth Games are absolutely fantastic opportunities for business. I have already committed £1 million worth of funding to ensure that food and drink will be a key theme of Homecoming 2014 and the other events as well. From international attention to community food networks, food is at the heart of our lives. We must understand more, challenge more and expect higher standards. There is so much excitement and vibrancy amongst those who produce food in Scotland. They have high standards and justifiably they are proud of them. Today I urge all Scotland to back our food producers. I urge consumers to ask more questions about their food. Those who provide and sell food should source from shorter supply chains and promote high-quality local food. There are challenges ahead, and we will set up a new food council this summer to support our work over the coming years. But we have much of which we should be proud. We are fuelling Scotland's food revolution through education, grow your own and local food. Our £12.4 billion food and drink industry is a real Scottish strength. We are supporting that industry like never before. From global to local, our provenance is known for quality and trust, and 2014 will capitalise on that. We should back those who do it well. That means backing Scotland. Horsemeat has taught us the real value of these words. So let's make Scotland a good food nation, and I commend the motion to Parliament.
Many thanks. I now call on Claire Baker to speak to and move Amendment 5892.3. Ms Baker, 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I was pleased last September to have held a members' debate on the Five Diet manifesto, with the hope of starting to encourage a discussion on our relationship with food, to discuss the way in which we eat, the way we grow and the way that we trade. If anything, the need to have that discussion has intensified in the wake of recent food scandals, and it is unfortunate that it has brought a crisis to bring us to this point. I doubt if there is anyone in the chamber today who would disagree with the statement and the sentiments of the Cabinet Secretary when he says Scotland produces some of the world's finest food, or that our food and drink industry is a vital part of the Scottish economy. But while we recognise the contribution of our farming sector, fishermen, and welcome the initiatives promoting the best of what Scotland has to offer, the stark reality is that food banks are on the rise. There is a doubling in demand for food parcels, and according to Save the Children, 1 in 6 children go to bed hungry every night. In the debate in September, members across the chamber discussed a food sector that is dominated by a few companies, and in recent weeks we have seen how they influence the food chain. The current horsemeat scandal has magnified this issue, with large companies, which many considered reputable and safe, having been implicated. Companies and organisations that consumers trusted, from Findus to Birdseye to Tesco and Asda, have been implicated. We are right to challenge the supermarkets over their supply chains, and it is right to identify the need for greater EU action on labelling. But the Scottish Government has responsibility for regulation and implementation of that in Scotland, and recent events really must force us to ask whether this system is robust enough to restore the confidence and trust of the consumer. And if we were able to achieve this, that would be both to the benefit of the industry as well as the consumer. We are still awaiting the final results from DNA testing, and with weekly reports of a new company or product being implicated, or a completely new product or example of food fraud, it seems that we have not yet reached a resolved conclusion. It is important that we ask the hard questions. We can recognise the strong traceability there is within Scottish farming and the positives of our food sector, but we cannot be complacent. Since the Cabinet Secretary's statement on the horsemeat scandal, we now know that 2 large catering companies, Brakes and Sodexo, who both were supplying our public sector, have been supplying adulterated meat products. So questions still remain unanswered over who supplied Brakes and Sodexo with this meat. Has the Cabinet Secretary been informed of who supplied this meat? And if so, will he inform Parliament and consumers? If we are to aim for a transparent food chain with full traceability, then we deserve to know where this processed meat originated from. To regain consumer confidence, we must ensure that all information is fully available and there is full traceability back to where the horse meat originated. The Cabinet Secretary, in his initial statement to Parliament at the start of the session, told us that food and drink contracts are awarded with a balance between price and quality. We were informed then that quality is vital in the awarding of a contract, and that it is not necessarily the lowest price that will win the contract. It has, however, since been revealed that Scotland Excel contract for school catering is awarding an aweighting of 65% price to 20% quality. Cost is therefore nearly 3 times more than quality. That is not a balance. Was the Cabinet Secretary aware of the 65 to 20% ratio weighting when he made the statement to Parliament? And does he agree it would have been better to have greater clarity for members and for Scotland's parents? Last week there was also an announcement that the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs would join the Cabinet Secretary for Education in hosting a school meals summit. We now know the average cost for school meals can be as low as £1.68 per meal, and while we can point towards local authorities such as East Ayrshire and their focus on local food sourcing, it is evident that local authorities were encouraged towards national procurement contracts as a means to deliver best value. Parents and carers should be able to send their children to school in confidence that the lunch that they eat is healthy, nutritious and exactly what it is described as. For some children across Scotland, the school dinner is their only meal of the day, and transparency, traceability and quality must be higher on the agenda, and we look forward to hearing more from the Cabinet Secretary in terms of outcomes from the summit that was recently held. We will probably never know how much horsemeat has been in the food chain prior to the breakout of this scandal, or how long the adulteration of food has been taking place. It has been clear to this process the complexity of the supply chains and the relationships between companies have been difficult for people to understand. If the Food Safety Authority of Ireland hadn't found traces of horsemeat DNA in beef burgers on the 15th of January, then there's every chance that the recall of contaminated products would not now be taking place. Ulster SPCA believe that there are 70,000 horses unaccounted for in Northern Ireland, and through the close working of the USPCA and the Scottish SCPA, we already know that Scottish ports have been used in the transportation of maltreated horses and fake horse passports. Was the Cabinet Secretary aware of the conviction and subsequent fine of a horse trader from Northern Ireland in November last year at Stranraer Sheriff Court for transporting maltreated horses with no or fake passports? This is such a recent conviction in the current circumstances is concerning. Does the Cabinet Secretary know if any information sharing took place in relation to this conviction? Of course, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but we can maybe now recognise there is a greater need for agencies sharing information, and sometimes those connections are not easy to identify. So, although a national debate has started with a scandal over horsemeat, it has grown into a much wider examination of food standards. Waitrose withdrew a product after contamination with pork at its Shettleston plant, a major concern for halal customers. There have also more recently been reports that banned mechanically separated meat is being used in the UK to count towards meat content, and then only this weekend questions have been raised over the reliability and accuracy of meat dishes in restaurants. And although many of these cases are about mislabelling, there have also been concerns over public health. George Fairgrieve, the Food Safety Advisor at the Royal Environmental Health Institute of Scotland, recently said, "A worrying impact of the reduction in the number of inspections being carried out is that the opportunity for fraudulent activities increases and law-abiding traders are disadvantaged." He goes on to say, "There are other vital areas of public health that must also be considered, for example, preventing or dealing with outbreaks of E. coli 0157 and Legionella." So these latest revelations show once again it is the average customer in Scotland who is being let down. The launch of the consultation on the Food Standards Body for Scotland last week was welcome, and we must take it as an opportunity to review what is working and what needs to be improved. My colleague Richard Simpson...
Does the member agree that cuts in the FSA, which emanated from the Labour government in London, and further cuts by this coalition have made it more difficult for the tests to take place, and that affects people as much in Scotland as it does in the rest of the UK?
Claire Baker.
What I do know is that since 2008, under the SNP's watch, we have seen a reduction in the number of meat inspectors and environmental health officers, and that has happened under the current government, and we can see the cuts being passed into local authorities and the kind of pressures they are under. And if you're working within a light regulatory system, it is then seen perhaps as an easier area to make the reductions. So my colleague Richard Simpson last week raised questions over the funding of the FSA, and although commitments have been given on the stability of FSA funding, the new body will have additional responsibilities that will need to be fully supported. I mean, really, going back to Rob Gibson's comments, really this debate should give us the opportunity to think, do we have things right? And recognise there are mistakes in the current system, regardless of where those mistakes emanate from. This gives us a chance to think, do we have the regulatory system right, and are we delivering the best interests of the consumer? A recent Unison Scotland report raises concerns over the drop in food sampling by a third, the reduction of meat inspectors by 50%, and a drop in the number of environmental health officers and local authorities. 56% of environmental health officers say their team has seen major cuts. A further 10% describe cuts as severe, with one member saying we've not submitted any samples for food in 10 months. It is not just a reduction in staff numbers, but the way in which the system operates. There needs to be random testing, unannounced visits, a system for whistleblowing, if we are to have integrity in the system. We have seen a combination of lighter touch regulation and financial pressures result in fewer checks and balances. Professor Andrew Watterson of Stirling University described the risks as declines in meat inspector numbers and local authority safety officers, along with reduced food sampling, must contribute to a weakening of public health standards and the possibility of criminal abuses in the food system. Of course, I recognise the work of the FSA in recent weeks and the additional number of inspections that have been carried out, but these are all after the event, and if there are any problems, I imagine premises will have got their house in order for a pre-announced visit. Given what we now know, we need a robust assessment of whether the system provides us with confidence. Food is a complex issue. The Parliament has been bold in other areas of public health, and yet our food policy is primarily defined by export levels and quality products, both positive outcomes, but a food policy must work for everyone in Scotland. It is important to our economy, to our health, to addressing inequalities. The Government motion today does not address the challenges being faced over food, the growing inequality around food and the crisis which has engulfed the sector across Europe. These are the matters the Parliament needs to address, and I move the amendment in my name.
Many thanks. I now call on Tavish Scott to speak to and move Amendment 5892.1. Mr Scott, a relatively generous 6 minutes.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. I feel Claire Baker is quite right that today's debate on food and the debates that are now going on in different forums across the country have come out of yet another food scandal. As someone who used to be involved in agriculture on a very day-to-day basis, it was also always a source of some regret that the only time politicians got really interested in food debates, or the only time politicians got very interested in fishing or in another aspect, was when there was some big scandal going on. So I hope that today wouldn't just be about the constructive points that members of all parties want to put to the Minister about his food policy and about public procurement and about other aspects of this really important industry for Scotland, but also about taking a much more mature and reflective look at the very wide picture that Claire Baker painted there very fairly, and the importance of it not just being about the export trade, important as that is, and I want to pay tribute to the Scottish Government for the way they've stepped up on that point, but on the need to encapsulate food in its widest possible sense, from the school plate right through to a whisky bottle being sold in Japan. And there can be no greater illustration of that wider debate than the Sunday Mail this weekend, which reported on the substituting of lamb with beef, which it is claimed is widespread in Indian restaurants. I suspect if any issue would bring the food that we eat home to most Scots, it would be the thought that the restaurant or takeaway of an Indian persuasion that is apparently not all that it might be in terms of the lamb on the menu is the kind of issue that is very strongly in their mind indeed. And in that report, which Professor Hugh Pennington, who many of us have come across in the past in this Parliament, went on to say what needed to be done and pointed out the gaps that currently exist, which only goes to illustrate that this sector does not stand still, and the regulatory environment and the measures that are in place to protect the consumer and to enhance the consumer's experience do need to be constantly refined and constantly reconsidered. I want to raise one particular measure before coming on to local food procurement, and that is on fish. Fish is a healthy part of a balanced diet. Mackerel and herring are notably rich in omega-3 oils, which are extremely good for human health, and that also applies to salmon. So food policy for Scotland should also include a heavy focus on fish. Yet right now, white fish prices, haddock, cod and other species, are at very low market levels. There are increasing white fish imports from Northern Europe and indeed from across the world, to take Patrick Harvey's Food Miles point. Yet 60% of all fish eaten in Scotland is bought in fish and chip shops. Yet they are buying from the Faroese, from Iceland and from Norway. Less than 10% of fish caught from Scottish waters is used in Scottish fish and chip shops. So we need a net-to-plate strategy which stimulates Scottish and indeed UK demand for home-caught product. The Scottish Government should promote the provenance and quality of Scottish caught seafood in the way that they are rightly doing on beef and on other products. But why is sea fish, a quango responsible for the promotion of fish as a healthy part of the diet, spending advertising money on fish from Iceland and the Barents Sea? There is a leaflet that some people may have seen sticking up on fish and chip shops the length and breadth of the country, in which they specialise and highlight that fish comes from Iceland and the Barents Sea. It must be pretty tough on the Scottish industry, who watch Iceland break international laws to illegally catch mackerel, to now find that an industry promotion body based in Edinburgh is helping to sell Icelandic fish into our markets. So I asked the Cabinet Secretary to look into that. He appoints with the other devolved administrations, the chairman of Seafish, and he approves the board. That position cannot be filled unless he agrees with the appointment. So the Scottish Minister has great power to wield on behalf of the industry in the promotion of food policy. But does this not serve to illustrate that there are too many people across all these numerous agencies and quangos of government not pulling, in this case, for the industry? Will he undertake to fix this issue and therefore help the Scottish whitefish industry? The new Scottish food policy and procurement approach for schools and hospitals should include fish to a far greater level before, and that would mean more locally caught fish on more dinner tables, work canteens, schools and hospitals, fairer prices for our boats, traceability for food contracts. The North Sea Marine Stewardship Council caught haddock from net to dinner plate, and of course economic benefits of this approach to Scotland and indeed to the UK. I've raised in successive weeks at various question times the sourcing of frozen food in terms of food procurement by 28 of 32 local authorities from Breaks, the company that Claire Baker mentioned earlier on. Now, mince for school dinners comes from this company, but no minister, and I asked this specifically of Michael Matheson a fortnight ago, no minister has been able to tell me from which farm that mince is sourced. Now, what Michael Matheson did say is those contracts, this is the Scottish Excel contract, does include traceability. That is a criteria of that policy, and therefore I am at a loss to understand, and if the Minister can tell the Chamber later on in the wind-up, that would be genuinely very helpful. I am at a loss to understand why school mums and dads, why teachers, why pupils as yet don't know where that mince comes from. They know it comes from Breaks. They don't know which farm it comes from. And as that company is a Kent-based conglomerate, it is fair to assume that they source from very widely across this country, and no doubt from Ireland as well. Scottish farmers must comply with the most exacting traceability standards in the world, and promotion bodies such as Scottish Food and Drink and QMS use this positively, and rightly so. But surely, Presiding Officer, farmers have every right to expect that in return their children in local schools should know where school mince comes from. They don't at the minute. When will that change? Can I finish, Presiding Officer, with the point about the statement issued by the Government and COSLA after the summit last week? And it's a little bit disappointing that Mike Russell, the Education Minister, isn't here, as he was, I'm told, part of that. Now, that statement does not mention sourcing or local produce. And I hope again in the wind-up that the Minister might take some time to go into what was achieved at that joint meeting, which was right to have. I agree with him in terms of that meeting taking place, but particularly in terms of sourcing and local produce, what changes can schools and hospitals and the public sector now expect, and will that drive at the importance of local food and local procurement?
Many thanks. I now call on Alison Johnson to speak to and move Amendment 5892.2. Generous 6 minutes as well.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Shelter, warmth and food are the basic things that keep us alive. And according to physiologist Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs, just above these basic physiological requirements for life is the need for safety and freedom from fear. Food scares, therefore, affect some of the most basic needs we have come to expect to be fulfilled in our modern, rich Western society. A safe, secure supply of food is an essential prerequisite to a stable society, and governments quite rightly place agriculture high up the list of priorities. In this context, the recent horsemeat scandal has shocked us, not only because some horsemeat has found its way into some products advertised as beef, but because retailers and end producers seem entirely unable to guarantee the safety of their food because they genuinely didn't know where it had come from. The meat processing industry is dominated by large companies selling meat as a commodity, in some cases with scant regard for the animal itself while it is alive, and little desire to ensure it can be traced. Retailers and customers have no way of knowing where much of their processed food has come from, because tracing back through the convoluted supply chain would, quite frankly, boggle anybody's head. And this glimpse into the murky corporate meat industry is deeply unsettling and has led, as the Independent Green Amendment says, to some overdue attention. On the retail side, the sector in the UK is highly concentrated. The big four supermarket firms currently control 3/4 of our grocery market. This means they can largely dictate the price paid to producers, even if this puts people out of business at times. We saw a graphic demonstration of this last year when dairy farmers across the UK had had enough. The supermarkets and other milk buyers pushed prices down, and thousands of farmers were going to be forced into the red. Farmers couldn't find a fair price on the market, so were forced to collaborate and protest. Short-term goals to prevent price cuts were achieved. The challenge we face is to stop a small number of players dominating the market and jeopardising the rural economy, the welfare of animals, and putting people out of business unnecessarily. Scotland's food and drink policy should be focused on supporting small and independent businesses to play a greater role in both our retail and supply chain. In the supply chain, this is not a seismic shift. The current food policy document recognises the supply chain is dominated by very small firms with 1 to 10 employees. Supporting these businesses must be at the core of our policy. What the milk protests demonstrate is that to do this, we need to support more diversity in the processing and retail sector. We learnt today Diageo plan to restructure their global supply chain, risking thousands of jobs in Scotland. A sector based largely on small businesses provides resilience against large-scale job losses like this. And of course, the picture is complicated and there are different issues for different parts of the industry. We are not selling a panacea, but it is clear the dominance of a few prevents the maximum number of people in Scotland from benefiting. I've mentioned the Soil Association's Food for Life scheme in the Chamber previously, and the Government's support for this is welcome, with 1 in 10 schools in Scotland assured of the provenance of the healthy food they provide school dinners. And procurement in East Ayrshire Council has led the way in Scottish schools, but others like Edinburgh are trying to catch up. The Soil Association is working with Curry and Buxton schools, Clovenstone Care Home, St John's Hospital in Livingston, which serves 1 million meals a year, and Edinburgh University's Pollock Halls, to get them buying local too. And Pollock Halls achieved the Bronze Award in January. My congratulations to them. Our food policy should be one that ensures that buying local is the default choice for public sector procurement and the easy choice for others. In Copenhagen, 75% of food consumed in public kitchens is organic and locally sourced. We should be making organic conversion and maintenance one of the Scottish Rural Development Programme's national targets when the consultation comes out in spring. Among many other benefits, such a target would help address serious concerns about the health of honeybees and other pollinators. There's a huge amount to learn too from the transition movement. They are equipping people with the know-how to reclaim spaces in the city, grow their own food, cook affordable healthy meals and enjoy themselves while doing so. The community garden in the Royal Edinburgh Hospital has become a huge success, enjoyed by many groups, and it's encouraging to see movement in NHS Lothian replicate this success, with Midlothian Community Hospital Garden now open too. For hospital staff, the links between food and health are easy to see. The gardens teach people what eating healthy, nutritious food can do to improve their health and well-being. And the Independent Green Amendment today talks explicitly of food policy playing its part in reducing obesity and improving health. Manufacturers have a huge amount of power over our diets, and they should be doing more to cut down salt, fat and the additive content of processed meat products, among others. And it's not just fair to encourage people to buy better quality cuts of meat. That excludes a large number of people who simply can't afford to do so. Top of the list on the excellent Fife Diets food manifesto is the soup test. And they'd like every child to leave school able to cook a cheap, nutritious bowl of soup. And who here could disagree with that? Our food policy should have the provision of nourishing people in Scotland at its heart, not an export strategy. It should promote a food and drink sector based on small, independent companies to ensure production remains on a human scale and provides the resilience and sustainability we need to have true confidence in our food again. I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Alex Johnson, a generous 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's a long time since I've spoken in a debate that involved the food and farming issues. In fact, my background as a rabid running dog capitalist dairy farmer in the 1980s and 90s left me in a position where some of my views on food markets and their regulation may not be entirely popular with the members of the Chamber or the farming industry itself. But let's brush over that slightly and start to consider where we are today and what we need to say in terms of Scotland's food production and the quality that it can provide. Now, as we've discovered, ministers come and go in this Parliament and with various governments. But amazingly, in the field of agriculture and environment, we have had only 2 ministers in the entire time of this Parliament. One was Ross Finney, who very quickly established a reputation for himself as someone who understood what was going on in the rural economy and within the farming industry. And subsequent to that, the change of government, the arrival of Richard Lochhead delivered a young man with a certain reputation in the past, but one who was well able to establish himself as a spokesman for Scotland's food and farming industry, both at home and abroad. So it's very important that we recognise the contribution that this Parliament has made and the responsible view that successive ministers and spokesmen from other parties have taken in ensuring that we do all we can to promote the food and farming industry to the best of our ability. That, however, is occasionally challenged, and the recent problem associated with the contamination of beef supplies with horse meat is one which has served to focus our industry. We, of course, in this country have a tremendous record of exporters of high-quality food and produce. The Minister also mentioned the whisky industry, which I now am aware of a new fact, exports 40 bottles a second, an extraordinary sum, in spite of the fact that Jamie McGregor and I are working as hard as we possibly can to keep as much of it at home as possible. However, the issue of produce and how we exploit it is something which should and does remain a concern both at government and at party level. Within my own party, there has been a number of campaigns to eat local, not least of which was the one sponsored by the gentleman who now occupies the chair in his time as a party spokesman on food and farming, where he promoted the Eat Local campaign, which we worked very hard at. Now, that's also the case that the government itself has taken forward similar projects, and the Think Local project is a key element of that. But we must never forget, and I would remind certain speakers that have participated in the debate so far today, that the global influence of Scottish food and produce is equally important. Scottish farmers today enjoy a higher price for their product because it has a quality, it has a reputation, and it can therefore command a premium in international markets. Even in fields where we do not sell directly into commodity markets across the world, prices for commodities, like grain for example, are higher in Scotland today because of markets influenced by countries like China. So the global commodity market, regardless of whether we sell into it, has a key role to play in determining high or reasonable prices for Scottish product. That has to be balanced, however, against the need for affordability. Now, recently, just a few days ago, there was a story appeared in the Aberdeen Press and Journal, and it related to information that had become available as to the cost of preparing a school meal. Now, while I understand Aberdeenshire dispute the figures that were used, the suggestion was made that a school meal in Aberdeenshire costs £1.68 to prepare and present. Now, I have serious concerns that in this day and age, with prices as they are today, as to how a meal can be prepared for £1.68. And I will be pursuing that matter with Aberdeenshire Council. But the question remains, can it be done, or can it be done legitimately? My concerns remain. However, the issue of horse meat and its inclusion in beef products in this country is one which I believe does not require us to take radical or excessive action in terms of regulation. The suggestion that more regulation is required is one which I actually doubt. You see, regulation is already very strong and has been very effective in keeping high-quality produce in the marketplace and on our supermarket shelves here in Scotland. The problem we have is not the regulation itself, it is the failure to properly enforce and police existing regulation. The problem we face with the horsemeat scandal is one of criminality, where product has been moving across borders unregulated and where it has been included in products which have come to this country but should have been properly policed in their country of origin or country of production. Therefore, the effective implementation of regulation is more important than simply throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It does concern me that we continue to have, in debates in this chamber, opportunities taken to talk down the quality of Scottish produce and Scottish food. And sadly, I find it repetitive that the Green Party seem to think that this is another opportunity to do that. I highlight the fact, I'm coming to the end of my remarks,
in his last minute.
I highlight the fact that the idea that somehow buying better quality cuts of meat might be an answer to this problem is a misunderstanding of how the beef industry works. Because, of course, the best quality cuts of meat and some of the poorest quality cuts of meat actually come from the same carcasses. And the realisation that that was the case is one which one of our McDonald's, for example, a chain of burger restaurants that some of you may be acquainted with, actually took the opportunity some years ago to take advantage of that opportunity and ensure that their product contained the best quality meat that was available. And that's why they have not been implicated in any of the recent problem. I believe, Deputy Presiding Officer, in high-quality produce from Scotland, but at cost-effective prices, and I believe that this government, if it is careful, is still steering the correct path.
Excellent. Thank you. Now call on Graham Day to be followed by Elaine Murray. 6 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The County of Angus is very much at the centre of Scotland's flourishing food industry, from soft fruit to smokies to popular preserves. The part of the country which I unfortunately represent contributes in good measure to this success story. But in keeping with the Scottish Government's ambitions, there will be no resting on laurels. The plan is to do even better, whatever challenges might arise. Angus, of course, has a long-standing reputation in traditional forms of agriculture, but increasingly over recent years it's come to the fore as the focal point of Scotland's burgeoning soft fruit sector. And at the heart of this lies the Angus Growers Organisation, which has 18 members growing about 1,000 acres of strawberries, raspberries, blackberries and blueberries. And recently they began planting cherry trees, which will begin to bear fruit in a couple of years. And although based in Arbroath, the organisation has members in Aberdeenshire, Perthshire and Fife, as well as Angus. There's involvement from Old Meldrum down to Crail and west of Blairgowrie. And the growers have over 200 people working for them all year round, and up to 2,000 seasonal workers between March and November. All told, they sell over £30 million worth of fruit a year, all packed into punnets, ready for sale locally on the farms themselves, or sold through 5 major UK supermarkets through their marketing agent, Angus Soft Fruits, another Angus farmer-owned business. Angus Growers members are very much at the forefront of research as well, and plant breeding, having developed their own new premium variety of strawberry, the Ava Rosa, which has been introduced to the market in commercial quantities this year. They also work closely with the James Hutton Institute on research, looking to ensure Scotland's soft fruit sector continues to progress and in the most appropriate way. They have, for example, developed the Good Natured Fruit brand, producing and selling pesticide residue-free fruit grown on the farms using biological control of pest and disease techniques developed in-house. They've done this principally because this is the right thing to do for the environment. But there is another driver, of course, and that's need, because of the declining bee populations, an issue which Alison Johnson touched on earlier. In order to maintain pollination, Angus growers are actively planting suitable habitats around the polytunnels to encourage bees to remain in the area and breed. They're using local beekeepers to bring their hives in, and indeed buying in bees, because without the bees you don't only suffer reduced yield, you get unevenly shaped berries. So the soft fruit sector is on the case, but at the same time, understandably, taking a keen interest in developments with regard to possible EU restrictions on the use of neonicotinoids and how the government will respond to this. As I suggested earlier, the leading part being played by Arbroath in the growth of Scotland's soft fruit industry is perhaps not as widely recognised or appreciated as it might be, although I know the Cabinet Secretary very much understands the situation, having visited the set-up there himself. Another perhaps not fully understood contribution from the town of Arbroath to Scotland's food industry is preserves. How many members here today are aware that the well-known Mrs Bridges line is manufactured in Arbroath by Mackay's? Mackay's makes jams and marmalades using traditional copper pans sourced from Dundee. The strawberries, raspberries and blackberries used in their products also come from local farms in Angus, Perthshire and Fife. Products sporting the traditional Mackay's tartan brand are to be found in 3 UK supermarket chains and 5 in Scotland.
Mr Crawford.
Pointed that the members not yet mentioned the famous Forfar Bridie. I would have thought that actually that's the most important thing to get on the record today. It's a fantastic product done with local produce.
Graham Day.
I have to tell the member I was being entirely parochial when Forfar's not in my constituency. In terms of the preserves, beyond these islands, Mackay's export to 50 countries worldwide. And then, of course, from our neck of the woods comes perhaps the most renowned foodstuff of Angus, the smoky. Although generally referred to as the Angus smoky, the smoky actually hails from the nearby coastal village of Auchmithy, around 3 miles north of the town. Now, local legend has it that the smoky came about because of a fire one night in one of the stores that destroyed barrels of haddock preserved in salt. The following morning, the locals came to clean up the ruin and found haddock which had cooked inside the burned barrels and discovered it to be not only edible but actually quite tasty. That may, of course, be a romanticised version of how the smoky came about, but I think I quite prefer that one. Arbroath's connection with the smoky comes from the end of the 19th century, when the local fishing industry was in terminal decline, and Arbroath Town Council offered the fisherfolk of Auchmithy land in an area of the town known as the Foot of the Toon, and use of the harbour. It was, of course, an offer too good to turn down, and all these years on, there are a number of businesses located around the harbour producing Arbroath smokies, making them widely available through major supermarkets in the UK and via the internet worldwide. And, of course, since 2004, the smokies enjoyed protected status. Presiding Officer, I recognise entirely I could be accused of making a largely parochial contribution to the debate, but I hope I won't be the last member to highlight the role of their areas play in the success story that is Scotland's food and drink industry, because this is an industry which is, as is nationwide located, is wide-ranging in nature. From almost every corner of our country comes a contribution, and from this Parliament today should come the message that we welcome and will continue to support these contributions. Because while the horsemeat scandal has focused attention on food and served to remind all of us of the importance of having the appropriate safeguards in place, we should not for 1 minute lose sight of one simple fact. When it comes to food and drink, Made in Scotland branding is respected the world over, and with good reason. And can I conclude by highlighting the work of the Royal Highland Educational Trust? The Cabinet Secretary mentioned in his opening remarks the importance of educating young people about healthy food and where food comes from. In Angus and across Scotland, the RHET does some fantastic work in this regard, and I hope members will join me today in congratulating them on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Dr Leigh Murray to be followed by Bruce Crawford. 6 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too am glad to take part in the Scottish Government's debate on food policy, not least because food production is an important part of the local economy of Dumfries and Galloway, and the link between tourism and local produce is becoming increasingly realised. Dumfries and Galloway produces a fifth of Scotland's beef cattle and a sixth of our sheep. And our mild and admittedly somewhat damp climate is greatly suited to the rearing of high-quality livestock. In his speech, the Cabinet Secretary mentioned Savour the Flavours, a project partially funded by the Scottish Government and the European Community through the Leader 2007-13 programme, and I and others representing Dumfries and Galloway have spoken of its success in debates, and I make no apologies for doing so again. Savour the Flavours supports Dumfries and Galloway's food industry and drink industry through working with producers, chefs, manufacturers, farmers' markets, events organisers, schools and consumers to raise awareness of local produce. Dave Smith, who runs the Buccleuch Arms Hotel in Moffat, revived the organisation in 2009, since which time Dave, his project manager Liz Ramsey and the Savour of the Flavours Committee have facilitated events, festivals and work with young people to promote the region's fine produce. Savour the Flavours is in its last year of Leader funding, and I hope that further funding can be identified to support this very worthwhile project, and that is a bit of a hint, Cabinet Secretary. Now, the horsemeat issue has presented an opportunity to our local producers, retailers and outlets to promote their products. Savour the Flavours issued last week a press release launching their Nay Horsemeat Here information campaign. And I was one of the politicians from across the parties who supported their Twitter campaign to commit to purchasing locally produced meat. Indeed, that was no difficulty for me because I do already purchase locally produced meat. I live within walking distance of a busy farm and farm shop where I can purchase free-range beef, pork and lamb reared on the premises. Indeed, should I wish to do so, I could undertake a farm tour to visit the belted Galloways, black-faced sheep and spotty pigs, which I will consume at some time in the future. I have no need to fear that any equine has found its way into my Minster sausages, and I can be sure of the quality of the food which I am buying. And the products are around the same price as those products which I would buy if I bought them from a supermarket. But I think it is here that I need to sound a note of caution, because I would be buying the top-of-the-range products in the supermarket too. I can afford that on an MSP salary, and my husband and myself, we like food and we like cooking, so we're happy to pay the premium in order to get the best. But not everyone has the luxury of being able to afford to do so. And I feel that sometimes during the horsemeat scandal, and indeed during the discussions of the research issued last week regarding the health risks of consuming too much processed meat, some commentators have seemed to blame the poor for the food choices they are forced to make, and the deceit which has been perpetrated by some parts of the international food chain, and indeed on the consequences for their own health. I mean, sure, I can peruse the range of top-quality products offered by my local producer, or indeed by my supermarket, but that is not true of all my constituents. What about the family who are about to be hit by the bedroom tax when it comes in next month? Or indeed the disabled person who has lost DLA and has not been transferred to PIP? Or the working parent who has lost their tax credits due to rule changes which disallow those who work for less than 27 hours a week? The Scottish Government's National Food and Drink Policy of 2009 quoted figures from some years ago, from 2005-06, which indicated that the poorest decile of UK households spent 15% of their income on food and non-alcoholic beverages, and the second poorest decile spent 17%. And I can only imagine that the proportion of income for these households today is significantly higher. The other criticism which is levelled at consumers is the use of convenience foods and pre-prepared meals. I had a rather posh-spoken old man on the radio the other day who made me shout at it, who said, "Young women nowadays don't know how to cook." Well, I don't actually understand why it is the responsibility of women to cook, but also people use convenience foods because they are time poor and sometimes because they are cash poor. And home cooking can be perceived as time-consuming, expensive and difficult. And I think that's a perception which is reinforced by many of the cookery programmes and competitions on the television, where ingredients are expensive, recipes are complex, and the presentation is a work of art. Yes, certainly.
I'm grateful she's taking the intervention. Can I absolutely agree with her that I think too many of these programmes have meals that nobody's ever going, or very, very few people are ever going to learn anything from. But would the member actually accept that most people these days do not know how to cook? It is actually one of those things that's been lost through the generations. I'm not commenting on whether women should be doing the cooking. Actually, most of us have not been taught to cook.
Coming on to something like, on that line, actually, because I would actually like to see a greater concentration of the cooking of healthy but inexpensive dishes, on dishes which can be frozen for those whose time is under pressure. My time is often under pressure, but I freeze food. So, we need to concentrate more on that, or how to make good, food go further so that higher quality but more expensive products can be afforded by those on lower incomes. Now, the Cabinet Secretary also spoke of the importance of children being educated about whether or how their food is produced and cooked is welcome. Now, indeed, I visited an excellent example of this at the Scottish Agricultural College in Dumfries with pupils from Annan Academy. But it is actually what young people see at home which has the greatest influence. And I think more does need to be done to support and enable all our people to enjoy a quality diet. And that will be a diet in which local produce plays a strong part. But I think there is a message that we need to get out there. And I don't think it's just the responsibility of government to do that. But I think we do actually need to make good food accessible to everybody. I think that actually is an equalities issue as well as a quality issue.
Many thanks. Now Colin Bruce Crawford, to be followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you, President Officer. I'd like to begin by saying how delighted I was to hear the Government had chosen the subject of food policy as a matter for today's debate. Delighted for a number of reasons. Firstly, because I am one of those privileged individuals who's lucky enough to say that I live to eat rather than eat to live. I am a self-confessed foodie, a bit like Orson Welles, perhaps not the same shape yet. And he once said, "Ask not what you can do for your country, ask what's for lunch." or J.L. Tolkien, who said, "If more of us valued food and cheer and song than hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world." I get where both of them are coming from. In fact, I can say I'm pretty jealous of people like Richard Bath or Ron McKenna, who are food critics, and I get a real buzz out of going to food shows whenever I get the chance. But secondly, and more importantly, I'm also hugely excited about the huge potential of the Scottish food industry and the fact that this debate gives us a chance to celebrate the fact that Scotland has the best quality food store in the world. And thirdly, because frankly I want to boast about the truly fantastic food businesses operating in and around the Stirling area. And fourthly, this debate provides us with the opportunity, as others have said, to recognise that while Scotland is blessed with a quality of food products, it's simply not acceptable in the 21st century in this rich country of ours that the need for food banks to feed our poor is increasing, and that will be made worse, as alluded to by Elaine Murray, because of welfare reform. And lastly, as is so vividly demonstrated by the IF campaign, Enough Food for Everyone campaign, Scotland must play its part to ensure that the 8 million people living on this planet who are living in hunger get enough to eat, enabling us to rid the world of that shameful statistic showing that more than 2 million children die each year simply because they can't get enough to eat. But let me get back to the main thrust of why we're here today, which is to celebrate our fantastic food products and the fact that the sales of Scottish food have rocketed in recent years. Of course, this has not happened by accident, and I want to commend the Scottish Government and Richard Lockhead in the same way as Alex Johnson did, in particular for showing leadership that has grown a reputation around the world for quality. Simply when consumers see Scotland on the label, wherever they are in the world, they are seeing the stamp of quality. I also like the way we promote our products, playing to our key strengths at home and abroad, on premium, strong, internationally competitive brands, on health, a reputation for naturally healthy food, on provenance, quality, authenticity and trustworthiness of Scottish products. The fact is that where quality and consistency is essential, Scotland delivers. For instance, with our red meat product of beef and lamb, we are renowned, as others say. Our farmers are renowned for producing some of the finest product in the world. But it's not only in the export trade where we're leading the world, but also domestically, from places like the Scott beef plant on the outskirts of Stirling. Their impressive state-of-the-art slaughter facilities processing around 2,500 cattle or 15,000 lambs a week. On Saturday, I was pleased to pay a visit to a fantastic local butchers in my own constituency, run by Michael Moore in Cumbus-Barron. The purpose of my visit to demonstrate my backing for Scotland's independent butchers and farmers and the quality of product they produce. You know, the big supermarkets are scrabbling now to do all they can to demonstrate traceability for their meat products, yet the good local butchers have been carrying out this good practice all along. And in Michael's case, he sources the majority of his beef and lamb from Caledonian Marks, which is, of course, a local farmers' cooperative operating in the Stirling and Oban areas. On Saturday, and this probably alludes to my diet and goes back a bit to the Forfar Bridie, I also purchased one of Michael's famous steak pies in the sure and certain knowledge I was buying a premium product of the highest quality, and goodness, I was right. If there are colleagues in this chamber today, though, like me, who like nothing better than a good pie, you'll notice a theme about what I'm talking about here, you'll have noticed that I recently put down a motion recognising the success of Cameron Skinner from Kippen at the recent 14th World Pie Championships. So if you're ever passing nearby Kippen, I can assure you stopping off to purchase either Cameron's pies or sausages would be a very well worth your effort. Now, as I said earlier, I like to go to food shows, and when I'm there I always try to buy the fabulous products of Eden Mill, run by the Gibson family from a real butcher's shop in Smokery near Blainfield. Now, of course, there are many other producers in the Stirling area producing top quality products across the range of foodstuffs, and I only have time to highlight a few today. But obviously, with Deanston and Glengoyne distilleries, both in my own constituency, contributing to that remarkable export record we've got in the whisky area, because of that, I'm quite delighted about what they do. But I wouldn't like the chance to pass without recognising the Moore Group, which is a special and unique family-run business based in Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. From the establishment of the fabulous Monaco Moor Hotel 20 years ago on the banks of the stunning Loch Voyle, known as the Daddy Cool of the Trossachs, to the creation of more fish, more bread, more farm and more to your door, the company simply produces the finest food and hospitality that Scotland can offer. I want to also, Presiding Officer, in closing, recognise the fantastic work done by Forth Environmental Link and the fantastic efforts they make to promote and encourage local food growing and consumption. I admire their work hugely. I know just how hard they work at getting their message across. How do I know that? I was involved in setting up one of the first ever farmers' markets in Scotland, in Perth, when I was a council leader. I know how hard it was to get that established, and with a firm foot, that has now happened across Scotland, and I'm delighted because of that. Presiding Officer, let me close by one quick quote. I talked about some historical figures. Let me end with a contemporary one. What I've enjoyed most, though, is meeting people who have a real interest in food and sharing ideas with them. Good food is a global thing, and I find there's always something new and amazing to learn. I love it. Jimmy Oliver, well, so do I. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Now call on Maureen Watt, to be followed by Jane Baxter. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I add my condolences to those of the Cabinet Secretary, as the Macaulay part of the James Hutton Institute is in my constituency. I'm delighted that we're having this debate today to highlight how important the production of food and drink is to the Scottish economy and how it has grown since the SNP government made it one of the key sectors Scottish enterprise should focus on in order to grow the Scottish economy, and the success this has had to date and the progress which can still be made. And the North East makes a big contribution to this. According to Grampian Food and Drink Forum, the region contributes 14% of Scotland's agriculture output, 26% of its cereal value and 11% of the total Scottish food and drink employment. In all of this, we need to be praising the contribution of the primary producers, farmers who in all weathers, and let's face it, it's been pretty grim recently, produce high-quality beef cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry, fruit and milk, without which none of this success story would occur. In this regard, there is still some work to do to convince hill farmers and crofters that it is worth their while and bank balances to increase stocking levels. I know, for example, that in the beef sector, Macintosh Donald in my constituency can process all the cattle they can get, mainly for sale to Tesco. And can I thank the Cabinet Secretary and the Cabinet Secretary for Finance for all their help in securing a new buyer for this and other parts of the Vion business. Today, it is, however, the contribution that fish and fish products make to this success story that I would like to focus my remarks on. Aberdeen City and Shire remain the most important fishing region in Scotland and the UK, with over £100 million worth of fish per annum landed at the port of Peterhead. Others may focus on the farm fish market, but I would like to concentrate on the fish brought to our shores, again in all weathers, by our fishermen. This sector has experienced a lot of pain in recent years, with quotas, cuts to days at sea and the decommissioning of vessels. Traditionally, the fishermen have landed fish and expected the merchants to buy it and find markets for it. Now I think at last we're beginning to see more collaboration and cooperation between the harvesters and the sellers. But in this sector, the prices, I think that Tavish Scott mentioned at the quayside, can still be very volatile. Only last week, those of us who attend the North East Fisheries Development Partnership were informed by John Wallace of Peterhead Harbour of the rock-bottom prices for whitefish at the port. This is partly due to the very large amounts of cod and haddock currently in the traditional fishing grounds, which seem to be heralding a return to the stocking levels that we've known in the past. This is good news if we can deliver security of supply, as the Norwegian fishing industry, backed by its government, is making a concerted effort to grab much of the market, both with supermarkets in the UK and our markets abroad. but our merchants are fighting hard and successfully to retain those markets. Today, much store is put in adding value, and I would like to highlight the success story of Joseph Robertson Limited in my constituency. Joseph Robertson used to mainly bread fish, but now they do that and much more, and supply Christmas party food, among other foods, to Morrisons and other supermarkets. And this year they've been selected as one of 35 businesses to take part in the Asda Supplier Development Academy 2013, which is backed by Scottish Food and Drink. 10 of those participating in the programme in 2011 have seen their sales go up by up to 330%. So this is a great accolade for the company, and I wish it every success. Aberdeen's contribution to the growing food and drink market also includes the Rowett Institute, which has been working with Marks and Spencers, among others, in creating nutritious, healthy, ready-made meals. As Elaine Murray said, following the horsemeat scandal last week, focus turned to the dangers of eating too much processed meat. And I was horrified in listening to any questions at the weekend when the only alternatives to the full English breakfast that the panellists could come up with were muesli and porridge. No mention of kippers or broth smokies, kedgeree made with smoked haddock, or even scrambled egg with small pieces of smoked salmon. Clearly, we have a huge education task to undertake on the variety of breakfasts we produce, never mind the other meals. And the good thing about fish is that there is very little waste in it. Finally, Presiding Officer, as someone from Bamshire, I can't sit down without mentioning the contribution of whisky to the success of food and drink. Whisky export reached a record high of £4.23 billion in 2011, up 23% from 2010 and 50% from 2007. New distilleries are being opened and existing ones working at full pelt. As a youngster, I was always made aware of the value of the whisky in the bonds round Keith, which, when taxed, was of higher value than that of the gold in the Bank of England, and that was before Gordon Brown sold off most of it. We may moan about our weather, Presiding Officer, but the temperate climate and abundance of rain for whisky and the grass for our milk cows, the raw ingredient for ice cream, for which we are so successful in the North East, means we are in an excellent position. Our excellent reputation for a clean environment producing high-quality foodstuffs can only be built on further, and I support the Government motion.
Many thanks. Colin Jean Baxter, to be followed by Richard Lyle. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Last week, in a restaurant situated just off the Fife Coastal Path, I tried beetroot ice cream. I must admit, it's not going to be my first choice for a cone when the weather does improve, but it was locally sourced and well made. And although that seems flippant, there is a serious point behind this story. I recognise that I'm lucky in having the opportunity to try such food. It taps into the spirit of the motion that the Scottish Government has laid before us, which is very much a celebration of Scotland's famous larder. And it's true that Scotland's food is excellent. Diverse producers continue to produce high-quality and innovative food, and the Aquaculture and Fisheries Bill, making its way through the Parliament, has emphasised the importance to the economy of our food and drink industries. And while it's undeniable that events such as the Ryder Cup and the Commonwealth Games will give such food the opportunity to be enjoyed and appreciated by visitors from around the globe, the motion we have before us today could just as easily be one about Scotland's tourism industry. I recognise the Scottish Government's wish to be seen to publicly support our food industry, especially in light of recent meat supply chain scandals, which we debated only recently in this chamber. But the motion we are today presented with ignores many of the important developments in the last few weeks and months. And as my colleagues have outlined, it is these developments that Labour's amendment seeks to highlight. The Scottish Government's document from 2009, Scotland's Food and Drink Policy, the apparent success of which the motion so warmly welcomes, states,
It is the Scottish Government's profound belief that every single person in Scotland should be able to access healthy, affordable and sustainable food. These are wise words, but I believe that statement absolutely sums up the problems facing many of our communities today. That is, too many people are not able to access healthy food that is affordable and available in their neighbourhood. I've spoken previously of my visit to the food bank in Dunfermline. Since September 2012, the 40 volunteers had distributed more than 1,750 kilograms of food. That's a lot of food going to many people who quite simply cannot afford to eat. And we have to face up to the reality that many of Scotland's consumers have difficult decisions to make when doing their weekly shop. When you're buying food to feed either just yourself or your whole family, then you have to be able to trust what's on the label, whatever your budget. The recent Unison Members' Survey rightly highlighted members' concerns about the future of our food safety services. Environmental health officers and other food safety officials have seen their numbers drop over the past few years, and in the case of meat inspectors, cut by a half. In the current climate, after the horsemeat scandal, it seems fairly obvious, even to a lay bystander, that any inspections which are scheduled to take place in the meat processing and food industry will not find major flaws. Random sampling and inspections to food production facilities should be kept up as much as possible, and I look forward to hearing the Scottish Government's response on this issue. And the issue of trust is repeated again when we look at the procurement contracts which are in place. The food which is reaching the Scottish population through many of our care services, schools or hospitals is one step removed from the marketplace. In these circumstances, the consumer is not able to go into a shop and look at a label and make their own decision about the produce on offer. They are presented with a finished meal that they have to hope is from good quality, correctly labelled produce. Thus, it is vital that the public services which source their food through procurement contracts are able to make decisions on more than just a cost basis. The quality of the produce on offer should be weighted against the price, and if possible, the economic benefits for the wider community, such as local supply chains, should also be considered by the purchasing body. It's clear that food access and affordability is a complex issue. As part of the development process of the Scottish Government's food policy, the Leadership Forum's report in 2009 noted that there is a real danger that a food and drink policy looks like an attempt to lecture or coerce communities. It seems to me that in the debate today, there is a real danger that the Scottish Government is forgetting those communities who would welcome the opportunity to be able to access a healthy diet for themselves and their families at a price they can afford. We should certainly celebrate Scotland's international reputation for high-quality food and drink and the huge contribution it makes to the Scottish economy, but it should never be at the expense of ignoring the difficult day-to-day reality facing families, school children, hospital patients and care residents of accessing quality, affordable food. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Richard Lyle to be followed by Rob Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since the beginning of time, two key items have sustained mankind: water and food. Both of these items are basic to life on this planet, and more we have to ensure that we firstly have plenty of each, and that each of these important resources are fit for human consumption. Scotland's key food and drink sector is vital to the Scottish economy, producing quality food, supporting jobs and promoting Scotland abroad. As I have previously intimated, I worked in the grocery trade for some years. When you buy food from any shop or supermarket, the customer should be confident that all the food that they buy is what it says on the tin, or indeed the packet purchased. We should have confidence in what we eat, and therefore the last few weeks have not customer confidence in the food that they eat. I do not intend to go into a debate of who is to blame, but as a consumer I expect every retailer and food supplier to now check what exactly they are supplying to supermarkets and shops in order to regain customer confidence. I know that all supermarkets in Scotland intend to supply quality products, but I am sure they are looking at their supply chain, and rightly so. Sourcing food locally is, of course, a way to ensure that you know what you are buying and feeding your family. Sourcing locally produced food should be encouraged. In every town or village there is a local butcher, local fruiter, local suppliers of excellent Scottish produce, This has already been stated by Graham Day and Bruce Crawford. In my village, New Stevenston, near Motherwell, we also have an excellent local butcher, John Morrison and Son, who supplies excellent Scottish beef and all butcher products, which you can be confident has been locally sourced and meets customer requirements. Bruce Crawford, come along and sample his steak, John Morrison's steak pie. They also are excellent. I'll bring you one in, Bruce Crawford. Supermarkets are, of course, where most people do their shopping. Sorry. Yeah.
Claudia Beamish.
I thank the member for the intervention. It's to highlight the importance of local butchers, and I saw a statistic which says that in the UK, in the last 20 years, local butchers have dropped from 30,000 to 6,000, and I wonder if the member agrees with me that everything will be done to help by Scottish Government and anyone else to increase these again in the present circumstances is vital.
I think the Scottish Government has done well with the small business bonus, and in fact I would encourage people to shop at the local shops. Supermarkets are, of course, where most people do their shopping, and they now need to ensure that they are sourcing products which customers require. Major stores take note. Food tastes have changed over the decades, and many products from overseas are enjoyed by the general public. Supermarkets must ensure that they fully know what's in these products. I believe that supermarkets should also ensure that they pay farmers a fair price for the produce in order to ensure that farmers are encouraged to stay in the land and produce the amounts of food which will be required in the coming decades. Fair pricing is also crucial in the food industry. Scotland's red meat and fisheries sector continues to grow and grow. In 2011, turnover in Scotland's food and drink industry grew by 6%, gross value was up by 9%, and exports hit an all-time high of £5.4 billion, a 10% increase compared to the previous year. I also compliment the food industry in Scotland, and in particular I compliment the Cabinet Secretary, who has, to my mind, been a major supporter of Scottish food and drink industry. Richard Lochhead believes in the food and drink industry, and it certainly shows at any function that he attends, and I have also had the opportunity to be there. The Scottish food industry has an annual turnover of nearly £12 billion and supports nearly 114,000 jobs in Scotland. The output from beef, sheep and pig sectors have grown for the fourth year in a row. Beef production was the largest sector of Scottish farming in 2011. Sheep sector grew by 7%, pig sector by 15%. Nearly £250 million worth of Scotch beef was sold last year. Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork brands are currently underpinned by 6 quality assurance schemes, covering area including farming, feed, haulage, auction markets and primary processors. The success of Scottish fisheries sector is also impressive over the last years, and we should also support this industry. Agricultural production in salmon and freshwater fisheries are estimated to be worth £650 million. Scottish fisheries employ over 2,000 people in the salmon industry and supports around 4,000 upstream and downstream jobs. Scotland is also the largest producer of farmed Atlantic salmon in the EU. Scotland also produces more than half of the UK's farmed trout. Scotland is, I would suggest, an excellent producer of quality food, both farm and sea. I believe that we lead the world in quality products, and we should be taking every advantage to promote our quality products throughout the world. I note of the recent announcements by the Cabinet Secretary and the Minister for Public Health in regard to future quality food standards and the Food Agency, and I support these proposals. Our food production should be regularly tested, quality assured, and I am sure it will be, and that everyone will be confident that all the Scottish food is exactly what it says on the packet or on the tin, quality Scottish produce. I support the motion.
I now call Rob Gibson to be followed by Dr Richard Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I draw members' attention to my membership with Slow Food International, the Soil Association and the Scottish Crofting Federation. On the subject of food, I note that the motion makes it clear that we want to build the progress through increasing the number of consumers at home and abroad that enjoy and celebrate Scotland's famous larder. That doesn't mean that they all need to eat fillet steak. It means that they need to know that they trust the food that they eat, and indeed that we have much to offer here. But that means that our government has to make sure that Scotland gets the best deal it can from the Common Agriculture Policy in the common fisheries policy, because convergence criteria for an independent Scotland would allow us to spend more money on supporting these industries in this country, and I believe that that's why our food policy would benefit from that. Now, sustainable economic growth has a contribution to make, obviously through exports, and these are very welcome indeed. It funds growth in the home market, and the home market is the lifeblood of the way in which people live in Scotland. A healthy activity, diet and food security all flow from a food policy where we have the highest quality produce. But I'd like to dwell on a couple of points just now about some problems there. I'm delighted that we've got the new Scottish food body, which is going to be a key regulator in future, because it's essential that it takes up where the splitting up of the Food Standards Agency south of the border has left off. The new body will deliver these functions currently carried out by the UK-wide FSA: food safety and standards, feed safety and standards, nutrition, food labelling and meat inspection policy and operational delivery. And I believe that the horse meat scandal has left us with a labelling problem, and labelling and sourcing is something which Scotland wants to feed into very strongly indeed in terms of the way in which the EU covers these matters. And I believe that at the present time we should be aware that there are far too lax forms of labelling, and that horse meat issue is actually a labelling scandal. But also the question about the way in which genetic modification has been partly accepted in the EU and could be a threat to the natural produce of Scotland has to be taken on board. And a couple of points here about the development of food is important, because this was mentioned in a previous debate, but this part of it was not. There are conventional alternatives in the market for potatoes, for corn, for soya, for many other products which can be grown around the world and are safe without putting huge amounts of gold into the pockets of the biotech industries and reducing the range of product that's available for local farmers to grow. For example, the Sharvari Institute in Bangor in North Wales has got Hungarian strains of potatoes which are non-GM and are blight resistant. But because they don't have the money that Monsanto and the like have, they can't get them into an industry level. While gardeners benefit, it's not a case that we can all benefit through the supermarkets. And talking of supermarkets, it's important to see that they are wakening up to the problems that we face. When you look at the two-page advert by Tesco in the Observer on Sunday, they're talking about us counting our pennies. They're talking about our questions of trust. They're talking about the need for quality. They're talking about they want to change. But they are not going to change until they have a clear policy to support the producers of excellent food and not reject food which is the wrong shape, which is food that's good to eat and should be widely available and is not at the present time. So we can't blame the people who are buying the food to be told by the supermarkets that price delivers for them. That doesn't deliver the best. No, I'm sorry, I don't have time at the moment. There's a problem with labelling, there's a problem with GM, there's a problem with the supermarkets. But the Ombudsman that's been set up finally by the UK Government to deal with supermarket questions is one which has to come into play in terms of the origins of many of these products. And we look forward to finding out what Christine Tackon finds out about this, because she should look into horse meat mislabelling scandals, and we look forward to her actually getting heavily involved in that. I'd like to dwell particularly in the last couple of minutes, or a minute and a half, on procurement. In my own area, in the Highlands, we're seeing a major approach to this. And I should point out to people who've raised amendments that most of the food businesses in the Highlands and Islands are small businesses. Highlands and Islands Enterprise, as most of its managed account companies are in food and drink, and most of these are small. So we meet the ability to do that, but they must collaborate in order to sell, both at the regional, national and international levels. And the Highland Council this week is developing its policy in that because Dumfries and Galloway, as we've heard, have done very well in coordinating that, as has Fife and the Fife diet. But the point about many of these things are they are a much smaller geographical area, and we need to be able to make sure that we promote the Highlands more succinctly, and indeed the Highland Council's attempted to do so by contributing to the Highland-themed Royal Highland Show this year, and with regard to Food for the Ryder Cup and the Commonwealth Games. But above all, food and drink provides jobs locally. We're seeing new distilleries in small places like Thurso, Stornoway, Harris and Ardnamurchan. That is the kind of way in which we would be able to see many more different people taking part. And in my own area, crofting and croft employment and local spending power will be improved by those means, and a food and drink policy ought to be taking those into account, and I believe that this policy does that.
Thank you. Before I call Richard Simpson, can I say I do have a little bit of time in hand for interventions? Dr Simpson, to be followed by Nigel Dawn.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the opportunity to participate in this debate, partly because I want to address some issues around food safety and nutrition. Food safety is really pretty vital, and I want to acknowledge the progress that's been made. Who amongst us remembers the salmonella scandals with Edwina Curry, for example? A thing of the past. Eggs are now safe, although there are...
Alec Johnson.
Not the case that the greater part of that scandal was that eggs were always safe.
Dr Simpson.
Certainly it is an example of the media getting overly concerned about something, but there was a problem with salmonella and eggs. The work that's being done by the Food Standards Agency in Scotland on Campylobacter in chickens is also to be welcomed. It's another area of concern. But E. coli remains an area of concern. Professor Pennington, whom I discussed this debate with before getting up to my feet and speaking, says that we have one of the highest rates of E. coli in the world. And the combination of high E. coli rates with the UK Chief Medical Officer's statement this week on antibiotics should result in a call to action. On the issue of food hygiene, following on from Professor Pennington's report into an E. coli outbreak in Wales, the Food Hygiene Ratings Wales Act received royal assent on Monday this week. This Act makes the display of food hygiene ratings mandatory in food businesses in Wales. Is Scotland going to follow this? Can I ask the Minister when he will be introducing this measure? It seems an eminently sensible one. I'm reading David Payne's and Martha's Meals website. I found really very interesting, and I thought that was an interesting aspect of a debate involving social media that occurred in the last year. But he has expressed frustration that the site for Martha's Meals receives regular correspondence from school children around Scotland saying they are still being forbidden to take pictures of school meals. So how does this fit into a picture of transparency? Surely we should be engaging our children in these food issues. This has to be part of an overall anti-obesity strategy, and the social media in that age group are a vital tool. I hope the Minister and colleagues will make sure that a message goes out clearly that we welcome the input from school children. I'd also ask the Minister to join with his ministerial colleagues in education and health to guarantee that no industrial hydrogenated fats, or trans fats as they're known, are being served in any of Scotland's schools. The Hungry for Success initiative, which the Cabinet Secretary referred to, started 10 years ago and did lead to prescribed minimum nutritional standards for school meals in 2008, including maximum values for fats and sodium. And I welcome the review that he's announcing today and the restoration of the Hungry for Success group, because I hope, as I suggested in my intervention, that they will look carefully at the balance between finance and quality in terms of contracting for school meals and indeed all public procurement. There's a 50-50 balance for dairy products, but it's actually 72-28 for meat products. I do not understand why, when we've got such a fantastic source of meat in Scotland, we don't actually go on the basis of quality as much as meat. I welcome the fact that there are quite a number of local authorities signed up to the Soil Association Scotland Food for Live catering marks, and Stirling's one of those. I hope that the Government will be encouraging all the local authorities to follow. One of the Food Standards Agency in Scotland's roles is to tackle mislabelling or misdescription in food labelling. But legal standards don't apply to all foods, and practices of substitution with cheaper ingredients, such as mixing cheaper rice with premium rice, or extension with fillers, such as adding offal to meat cuts, that are legal here, but not in as much use in the continent. These are issues, I think, that we do need to address. Now, the Food Standards Agency in Scotland will working with DEFRA on a programme of surveillance in this regard. Can I ask him how now, with an independent Food Standards Agency in Scotland, will this be taken forward, particularly in a climate where the environmental health officers are under such pressure and where their numbers have been cut? Deputy Presiding Officer, I am particularly concerned about the growth in nutrichemical products. These are products which have a variety of health claims. Now, although these are controlled under Article 13 of the EU Nutrition and Health Claims Regulations, this is such a rapidly growing area, and the clever advertising and marketing claims that are being made for these products are a source for me of considerable concern, and I would urge the Minister to work with colleagues in looking at this area, because I'm not sure that the Advertising Standards Agency is the right body to deal with the advertising of these products. I want to go on to deal with food labelling, because that is important, and other members have already mentioned this issue. I very much welcome the late conversion of Tesco to the traffic light system. The money that was spent by producers and retailers in the European Parliament against traffic light system was, in my view, an obscenity. So I'm very glad that we're going to have this system in Scotland. But I took the opportunity to check in a couple of my local supermarkets the other day, and although, in fact, these are on many of the products, there are still many that do not have traffic lights on it. So I would ask the Minister again, when do we think that we're going to have traffic light system in alongside GDA on almost all products? I think that this is pretty important. It is clear from the market information that, from Sainsbury's, with whom I've had discussions, that the traffic light labelling system has moved their consumers to lower calorie and lower fat products. But again, the claims that are made by producers of X% less fat in their product, whilst correct and legally therefore not challengeable, are actually pretty meaningless if the level of fat is still very high. Labelling of salt, I think, is particularly important. It's staggering that the figures are 72% of women and 89% of men are still over the limit for salt. So I hope again the Minister will press the FSA to push ahead with the new standards for salt and get it down.
Dr. Simpson, could you begin?
The recent report showed that there actually has been almost no movement since 2006. And I'll end, Deputy Presiding Officer, by saying I regret that my trans fat bill was ignored. That's now supported by the medical fraternity. It's backed by Which for the consumer organisation. I hope that we'll go back to looking at it, because it is important in terms of health inequalities that trans fats are addressed.
Thank you. Nigel Dawn, to be followed by Roderick Campbell.
Much, Presiding Officer. Like the Cabinet Secretary and my colleague Maureen Watt, I would like to start by expressing my condolences to the family and friends of Dr Stuart Rind and Dr Gillian Dawson, who were recently killed so tragically on the A90. I say that because, as the local MSP, I want to assure members that I will not stop campaigning to reduce the risks on that stretch of road. I would also like to commend the work of the James Hutton Institute. A loss of colleagues will leave a hole. And I would like to encourage all the staff at the James Hutton. They are doing a really good job. It's extremely important in the context of this afternoon's debate. They are doing an important job for the future of Scotland, and we wish them well in it. What I'd next like to do is to turn to some local food issues in North Angus and Mearns, and to assure Bruce Crawford that the 4th of Bridie is not Grandad's.
Mr Dawn, I'm afraid you need to speak to your microphone.
I do apologise. The 4th of Bridie is indeed mine. And I share it, of course, with some regional MSPs, but I'm going to claim it as mine because 4th is certainly mine. Yes, I do represent a place that has some of the finest land in the country and some of the finest products. I'd also like to commend McCain's, who produce potatoes, staple diet of many of us, who produce potatoes around the world, I have to say, but grow, of course, their first crops very close to home in Scotland, which is a fine place to grow seed potatoes. I'd also like to commend the Usan salmon fisheries, again off the shores, off the coast of my constituency. They produce Scottish wild salmon. It's now a protected geographical indication of a EU protected name, and of course one of the finest products of Scotland as well. Could I then pick up on the basic issue, which again many have talked about, of buying locally, the obvious advantage of minimising transport? It does seem to me that this is one of the ways of actually addressing the dominance of the large organisations. Big businesses can easily be competed with by local producers and local retailers. I mean, they are simply minimising the costs and maximising the quality. It really is where we should be going. I also commend Alison Johnson for her mention of allotments, community gardens and indeed the transition movement, all of which I'm well aware of. I think these are an enormously important, potentially important part of the Scottish economy and the food chain. In fact, you get to the point where there isn't really a chain. You're growing it yourself, you're processing it yourself, you're cooking it yourself and eating it yourself, and that seems to me to be, maybe it seems a bit primordial, but it seems to me to be a very good place to go back to. I was also going to mention myself the issue of cooking skills, and I'm grateful to Dr. Lynn Murray for mentioning this as well, about which I know perhaps rather more than I should, since it's one of my wife's research interests. But it is genuinely the case that we have lost, through the generations, there's no point blaming anybody, many of the cooking skills which our grandparents would have taken absolutely for granted. Reflect on the situation, and I don't have to make this up, of a young student who does not know how to cut up a cabbage. If you are looking at this cabbage in the supermarket or in the grocer's and you don't know what it looks like inside, you literally don't know what to do with it, then you're not likely to buy it. The idea, all you have to do, of course, is to cut it up, make sure it's clean to start off with, cut it up and boil it. And there's a wonderful addition, and it's got lots of good things in it. We're not going to have a nutrition lecture now. But if you don't know what to do with it at all, you have a problem. And that's something which we genuinely need to address. Could I also commend Bruce Crawford? I gather now that Bruce Crawford is the man who created farmers' markets. Thank you again, brother. All in favour of farmers' markets. I have many in my constituency, and I'm sure we have many across Scotland. But I think we're beginning to see that if they're outside and only temporary, then actually the outside is often very cold. And if they're only there on a Saturday, that doesn't make them a regular shopping venue.
Rob Gibson.
Thank the member for taking an intervention. I think if we're mentioning Bruce Crawford, that we should also do so of John Scott and his wife, who were very strongly a part of the farmers' market movement, and indeed that this Parliament and many others should thank them for that.
Nigel John.
And also comments and acknowledge your mild chiding. But I think the point about farmers' markets now is that it's pretty clear to me and some around me that if we could get farmers' markets into perhaps slightly more permanent locations where they're kind of undercover, then actually, and this is not something that ought to be strange, this is very common in England, then we could actually establish them as perhaps the normal place where people go to shop, rather than just the occasional, as I say, Saturday morning if they happen to be there and it's not too cold. So I think there's an opportunity there which maybe the government could help with, not necessarily with huge sums of money. Lastly, Presiding Officer, I'd like to turn to the issue of labelling, perhaps in a slightly different context from some of the others, though I endorse many of the comments that have been made and much of what Richard Simpson said. I have before me the Beef Labelling Guide. It's produced by the Scottish Government. It's guidance on compulsory beef labelling and for the approval of other labelling schemes. Now, I'm sure that it's very sensibly put together, but it runs to 20 pages. And what it seems to imply is that it's really quite difficult for the local butcher to actually say, this beef came from that farm. And I would suggest that if that is the case, and that's kind of my understanding, then we've probably missed a trick here. I understand that the rules need to be pretty comprehensive and you don't want loopholes so people can come through them, but I do think it might be a little bit easier for very local suppliers to be able to say, I do genuinely know where this came from, it came off the lorry from there, and to be able to label things in an individual shop like that. I suspect that would be very helpful to the general industry, and it might well be that this guidance needs just a little bit of working on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Roderick Campbell, to be followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in today's debate. Scotland is slowly throwing off its Sick Man of Europe tag. Through education, increased awareness of eating healthily and having an active lifestyle, we are making progress. A balanced diet high in fresh produce is one of the biggest choices individuals can make to improve their health. Sometimes argue that local produce is more expensive than goods imported from overseas. Whilst that can certainly be true, there is no substitute for quality. Whatever the complex reasons behind Scotland's poor health record, it's certainly not because we lack high-quality produce from our own land and seas. Indeed, as the Cabinet Secretary alludes to in the foreword to Recipe for Success, it's a strange paradox that this nation should have such a poor diet-related health record. Scottish produce is world-class. Our seas are abundant in many key stocks, and despite the very clear need to improve the common fisheries policies so that we can get a fairer deal for our fishermen, just under 5,000 fishermen on 2,100 vessels landed £501 million worth of fish in 2011. In my own constituency of North East Fife, fishing plays a major role in the local economy. Communities such as Pitt and Weem land hundreds of tonnes of fish each year and support around 165 jobs in fishing and yet more in the connected supply chain. And in Anstruther, we, of course, have a world-known international fish and chip shop. Back on dry land, we certainly have a rich larder. Scotland produces some of the finest beef, lamb and pork in Europe, and together with more specialist products such as venison, haggis, and an enormous variety of arable produce, which is made into everything from whisky to jam to porridge, it's fair to say we're extremely well endowed with natural produce. The value and potential of Scottish produce is enormous, so it's absolutely clear that we must capitalise on our assets by supporting policies which encourage a rich and sustainable production chain. Some time ago, I was a little surprised to learn that it's primarily the Mediterranean region and not Scotland that consumes most of the langoustines caught in Scottish waters. Indeed, 10 million chefs, as the Cabinet Secretary has already mentioned, are committed to using Scottish langoustines in cooking contests and restaurants around the world. We should be proud of our strong export level, but it's perhaps a little sad that so much of that delicious product is being shipped overseas and away from the Scottish palate. I believe there is a willingness amongst consumers in the supply chain to address that kind of imbalance, and we need strategies at a national and local level that promote the economic, environmental and health benefits of eating Scottish produce. Turning once again to North East Fife and Fife as a whole, there are several independent organisations promoting local produce. The Fife Diet, mentioned already by Claire Baker and Alison Johnson, for example, is a consumer network of people passionate about local food. In 2007, Fife Diet began as a project encouraging people over the course of a year to commit to eating food from the region of Fife. Participants monitored their progress and then were encouraged to share details of their experience. The project, as is well known, has won several awards, including the Best Green Campaign at the 2012 Scottish Green Awards. It's now become a large network of people vying for increased sustainability and more local sourcing of food. As well as consumers, producers themselves are looking at new ways of bringing produce to a wider market close to home. As many speakers have already mentioned, the once popular farmers' market is booming and is in revival. There was an increase of 50% in the total number of farmers' markets around the country between 2007 and 2012. Both St Andrews and Cooper in my own constituency hold their own markets, attracting around 30 stalls at each event, selling local cheeses, meat, ales, fruit and vegetables and other specialist projects. And this is all to be welcomed. I don't have the time to mention all the local community organisations who work hard to promote local produce, but there are certainly many of them and they deserve our support. Anything that we can do to shorten or simplify the supply chain is worthy of serious consideration as it benefits everyone. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government's acceptance of the Scudamore Review recommendations is to be welcomed. The review recommended a holistic approach when considering food safety, labelling and nutrition, and I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has accepted all of the recommendations, has now set about trying to implement them and has commenced on a consultation with interested parties. Random testing clearly has a part to play, but the case for an open, transparent standards agency for Scotland to monitor production and supply, as well as to advise on nutrition, has well and truly been made. We should certainly be grateful that we have not followed the rest of the UK example in our approach to food standards in recent years. And whatever the final position in relation to horse meat, local butchers have reported a significant boost in their business thanks to their reputation as quality suppliers. Long may that continue. Like Tavish Scots, I congratulate the Scottish Government on the improvement in export performance of food and drink, and long may that trend of increasing exports continue. The Scottish Government's aim to increase the value of exports from the £5.4 billion recorded in 2011 to £7.1 billion in the next 4 years is certainly ambitious, but there is no substantial reason why that cannot be achieved. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, as a Parliament, our aim should be to encourage Scottish consumers to access food both locally and at a reasonable price. Certainly, food banks should have no place in a fair society, however, and I noted with interest the comments of Jane Baxter on that. But we do need to support our farmers, fishermen and manufacturers across the all-important food and drink industry, and that includes promoting the Scottish label vigorously, both at home and abroad. Food and drink really is a home and away industry, and it plays a vital part in the Scottish economy. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call Neil Findlay to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As Richard Lyle said, the provision of food is, like fresh water, a fundamental issue for human survival, and global climatic changes and pollution, water scarcity, political decision-making, short-termism and, of course, mankind's own stupidity and irrational behaviour have all impacted on our ability to feed not just ourselves but our fellow human beings. And over the years, I think, from the very dawn of civilisation until the present day, food security, food production and commodity trade have been a major cause of socio-economic and political debate and very often unrest. In recent years, in recent decades in fact, we've had BSE, foot and mouth, bird flu, salmonella and eggs, E. coli, listeria and the rest of it, and also concerns about additives, about the use of bulking agents, labelling, country of origin status, halal status, substitution of ingredients, school meal quality, the welfare of animals and the conditions experienced by intensive rearing, and now the horse meat scandal. And while I'm sure we all enjoyed the various equine gags on Twitter, Facebook and in newspaper diary columns, the reality is that the latest food crisis will certainly not be the last. Because I think in order to change this, we need to take on the vested interests who for years have dominated and directed global and domestic food policy. For decades, the EU has operated under the gross excesses of the Common Agricultural and Fisheries Policy, policies that have historically provided subsidies that encouraged overproduction, resulting in food being stored, then dumped on the developing world, and resulted in intensive farming, encouraging the use of fertilisers, pesticides, and, of course, the huge imbalance in EU spending. At home, the food production lobby is extremely strong, and attempts to deal with a simple issue such as the misleading food labelling have seen a really aggressive campaigning and a huge lobbying operation by the multinationals. An attempt to bring in, as Richard Simpson said, the simple traffic light system to alert people to the fat and salt and sugar content of food was opposed by the corporate giants such as Tesco. And I hear what Richard Simpson has said, that they appear to have been dragged kicking and screaming to move on these issues, and if that is the case, then that is welcome. But if we can't get companies to agree on such a basic step, then what chance do we have of dealing with some of the more fundamental challenges in our food supply chain? Because let's face it, food production is an area that exposes some of the worst aspects of our economic system. Intensive farming to maximise yield using factory-style methods, subcontracting of different elements of the production process and system, extending the supply chain, while all the while at each stage cutting the profits of each subcontractor. And I know the Minister will be familiar with that in relation to the closure of halls at Broxburn and how that had an impact there. We see goods travelling across countries and sometimes continents by road, rail and air for processing. Each stage, the owners taking every opportunity they can to cut down costs using cheaper meats, bulking agents, mechanical recovery, sweeteners, flavourings, preservatives and God knows what else, without any thought for the implications on sustainability, health or well-being, and with profit being the driving motive every time. And domestically, we can't get away from the fact that the cuts to local government mean that there are fewer environmental health officers and staff involved in enforcement, and this is having a direct impact on food safety. Public confidence in our food is essential for our producers and our food businesses, and I think it is very clear that light touch regulation in this area simply does not work. The horse meat scandal and the work of campaigners like Martha Payne has again highlighted the issue of school meals and the importance of quality school meals at this time when increasing numbers of families, as we have heard, are reliant on food banks, and that cannot be understated. School meals and hospital food should be valued as a major element of good healthcare and a good education system. And I think feeding our young people and the infirm the cheapest foods says something about our values as a society. Presiding Officer, there are, as we have heard, very good things going on in Scotland too, but this tends to be at the higher and premium end of the market. We can all be proud of premium products such as Scottish seafood, prime beef, whisky and soft fruits, but this is not where our problems lie. The chances of someone who is trying to exist on £56.25 or £71 a week job seekers allowance, experiencing langoustine, venison or premium malt whisky is just a fantasy. And to be told by media lovies to buy free-range eggs or farmers' market beef is both ludicrous and patronising. But of course we would all like to buy good quality food locally sourced, but far too many of our constituents that is not realistic. For many, food is very much in the front line of the battle for survival at a time of austerity and welfare cuts, and this at a time when the price of food has increased by 30% in the last 5 years. So, Presiding Officer, the picture is not good for all our people, and I think the Scottish Government would do well to recognise that.
Thank you very much. Stuart Stevenson, to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As René Descartes said in 1637, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Perhaps the motto for this debate and for Scotland should be, I eat, therefore I am. And indeed, I and all of us in this chamber are what we eat. And when I was a youngster, what I ate was really very different from what I eat now. Much of it was gathered in at our own hands in variety. We foraged for wild raspberries, wild strawberries, brambles, blaeberries, crab apples, sloes, rose hips. We gathered nettles, dandelions, wild garlic, mushrooms. We hunted for and ate... Yes?
Neil Findlay.
Since he was that busy, at what time did he have the time to invent the computer?
Stuart Stevenson.
Well, the computer, of course, was necessary to manage the complexity of life in a foraging environment, so therefore drove the need for that. Rabbits, pigeons, crows, the occasional hare. We got given bits of venison, roe deer largely, and pheasants. Trout, sea trout, the sea trout, of course, all caught below the high tide mark. We grew apples, plums, gooseberries, raspberries, strawberries, onions, potatoes, carrots, cauliflowers, cabbage, lettuce and beetroot. And my father, very fortunately as a country doctor, barely a day would go by without his returning with a brown paper bag full of eggs, a pat of butter, a tub of crowdie or some homemade cheese. The link between supplier and consumer was extremely short for us in our family. And there was virtually no sugar in our diet because, of course, it was rationed until I was 6 years old, even though in Cooper, where I was brought up, there was a huge British Sugar Corporation factory that turned sugar beet into sugar.
But we still have the opportunity, and our constituencies and other members have used their speaking time to talk of the local opportunities, and I will do much the same. I have the Rock Cafe in White Hills, which actually has its own trawler that it gets its fish from. So none of this Faroese or Icelandic stuff, although the trawler may have been up there to get some of the fish. We have one of the great adaptations of the Scottish cuisine, the Scotch pie, but not filled with meat, filled with Cullen skink, which you can get from Downey's, price £1.60. And when my wife says, "I'm going to Johnny's, what do you want?" she's not going to the butcher, she's not going to John Stewart's quality family butcher, she's going to a friend called Johnny, who happens to be the butcher. He will tell us the field that the beef has come from. He will tell us the name of the farmer that's provided it. And he's cut the supply chain. He's cut lots of people in the middle who are taking money out of what's going on. And we've taken Nigel Don's advice, and the farmers' market in Macduff, that is once a month, is in the covered old fishing market. I don't despise TV chefs as much as some. It was Delia Smith who, rather than concentrating on presentation on telly, actually showed you how to cook things. And to this day, I use Delia Smith's recipe for cooking rice. Be it cheap rice, be it expensive rice, it works. So food is a matter of debate. Now, why are we in such a pass with the source of some of our processed meat? I think there are many and complex reasons why that is the case. One of the ways of looking at errors in systems that the American Federal Aviation Authority use, they have 9 headings for looking at failures. And 2 of them, I think, in particular, I would briefly like to highlight. One is inadequate leadership, and the other is lack of assertiveness. What they found in aviation was that most of the mechanical causes of air crashes had been eliminated. Planes were getting much more reliable, and what you were left with 2 human beings at the front of the plane who were causing an increasing proportion of the accidents. A grey-beard captain with 20 or 30,000 flying hours, a junior officer behind him. The junior officer, more recently trained, better able to fly the plane, but unable to challenge the old greybeard. They introduced a system of cockpit resource management and enabled to get a better balance. And I think one of the things that we're missing in our food industry line in particular is actually relying on the people who are at the front. Jim Mather did a presentation in 2005, our former minister here, and one of the quotes that he took from, I think, Seddon was, "Make the worker the inspector," because the person in the front line knows what's going on, and it's important that they do. Turn the Food Standards Agency original goal, which was minimise risk to public health, into a more collaborative and positive one. Work with the food industry to progressively increase the volume and value of safe, healthy, nutritional food to improve public health and well-being. Move away from imagining that simply inspecting a process to death will actually lead to the outcomes we need. Yes, you need the inspection, of course you do, but move to seeing that those who understand the objectives are equipped to contribute to them. Make sure that the people who are working in the industry at every level know why their industry is there. Because the people in the front line are the people who understand what's going on, the people who can really contribute to improving the industry.
Could I ask you to come to a conclusion,
Presiding officer, it's certainly the case that if we can shorten the chain, we'll cut the cost, we'll improve the product. I'll end with a quote from Rumpel of the Bailey, because today's quotes. If you want the recipe for steak pie, don't ask a vegetarian. Let's get the people in the front line to be the people who actually improve our industry.
Thank you very much. And I had a late bid from Patrick Harvey. I can give you 3 minutes.
I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer, for you finding the time at the end of the debate. Like Bruce Crawford, I'm a food fan. I've got a great, passionate love of the quality food that's being produced in Scotland, and we should be rightly proud of it. So I can understand why many of the speeches in today's debate have focused on the pride that people have in the quality produce coming from Scotland. But there is a really serious problem if we mistake a debate about food policy in Scotland for being one about food manufacture at the quality end and ignore the issues about the food that is actually being consumed every day in every community around Scotland. If we forget that, then we're in danger of failing to recognise that the context is one in which we have a food system in crisis. I regret that Alex Johnson chose the last few seconds of his speech to misrepresent the Green Party's record in raising the issues of the food crisis that we're currently living in. The first people to raise a debate about green procurement in this Parliament. The first people to raise a debate about the overweening dominance and stranglehold of a handful of multinational supermarkets dominating the retail sector. Everybody is now recognising that these are issues that should be addressed and should have been addressed more successfully years ago. It's more galling, perhaps, that he decided to base part of his argument on stats lifted directly from a Green Party press release before misrepresenting our position. But I'll ignore that barefaced cheat for a moment. The staggering part of his speech was when he actually used the example of McDonald's as part of the answer of the problems of our food system in crisis. The idea that the answer to this boils down to let them eat Big Macs is simply one that we should be staggered by. Rob Gibson showed us an advert from, I think it was Sainsbury's, one of the big supermarkets. He held up an advert from one of the supermarkets. And I hope, like me, he's a wee bit tired of hearing from the supermarket's marketing departments about this, about the need to restore trust. I think, like Mike Small argued just recently from the Fife Diet, that there's a really serious danger in simply restoring trust in a fundamentally broken and untrustworthy system. These supermarkets seem to be perceiving this as an issue of reputation management rather than a problem with the structure of the industry. They are part of the problem. Their dominance is part of the reason we're in food crisis and why we've led to a food culture dominated by the value of nothing and the price of everything, dominated by the idea of generating maximum profit from the minimum quality of material possible. The consequences of this food crisis will be felt in the health of human beings and in the health of the environment that we depend upon. And it would be a failing of this debate if we didn't recognise that that was the context we're discussing it in.
Thank you. We now turn to the closing speeches and a call on Jean Urquhart. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, I think that we heard a great deal from the Cabinet.
Could you move your microphone round, please? Thank you.
Beg your pardon. We heard a great deal from the Cabinet Secretary about the success of the Scottish food and drink sector, the increase in turnover, the increase in exports and recognition of the quality label, the Scottish label, a label for quality, but possibly also the need, given the present crisis, for a food revolution and what that might look like. I was pleased to hear that the education programme included 800 schools and 55,000 pupils. That's really impressive. And community food initiatives, many of which are across the Highlands and Islands, and I've seen in action, are very impressive, where local people have been supported to grow food locally and serve their community in terms of local produce. That's all to be, I think, applauded, and I think is a really good move. The Hungry for Success school meals programme, I think, will develop and grow too as time goes on. But there is a need, I think, while we recognise the promotion of food and drink in the international market, there's an irony comes if we cannot, and it's been referred to today already, that I think by Neil Findlay, that local people may not have a diet of oysters and venison and partridge or whatever. Now, the thing that irritates me slightly about that is that there is a local diet that's well available to everybody, and I think that's where we have to get back to. The Fife diet does it well, and Alison Johnson made it very clear in the ambition for every child for the soup test, that every child leaving school would be able to make a good, healthy, nutritious pan of soup. And that's just a start. I think where there's a real misconception that buying cheap means that that somehow you can feed a family cheaply. It's not. Sometimes the cheapest stuff in the supermarket is actually the most expensive. And when people, particularly if they buy processed meals, which frankly, say, serve two cats maybe. But, you know, there's a real need for education. And I hope that the education programme that we have will achieve some of that. Both Claire Baker and Tavish Scott raised the issue of a very basic request to use our own produce. How does it happen? And it's I guess we've all experienced buying fish and chips, iconic to locals and visitors alike in Scotland, buy fish and chips to find that it is frozen Icelandic cod versus, and sometimes in the same street of the port where our own fish has been landed and immediately trucked elsewhere. There is something wrong as we talk about food miles. They have to be exacerbated by delivering white fish to foreign ports while importing the same but cheaper and, one questions, inferior project. The buying local produce should be the default position of the procurement contracts, and I think, again, Alison Johnson and others have made the point. If we are really genuinely to support our local producers, then I think that's where the evidence will lie in actually taking that leadership. And I agree too with supermarkets, some of whom have been well supported by government money to highlight and promote local produce. But what is it that we get in return? What control can we have over them? And I think that there's real leadership needed in order to, if the large supermarkets and the huge producers are going to be part of our culture in years to come, then I think some government control over them so that they are absolutely under no illusion that serving local produce is essential if they are to win anything of our custom. Yes, Alex Big Mac Johnson.
You're approaching your last minute. Can we avoid any kind of use of nicknames, please?
I think enough said. Perhaps we are still a nation of small businesses as far as food production is concerned, and certainly in the Highlands and Islands. Alison Johnson's amendment asks us to acknowledge that and to ensure that we have the opportunity to engage the nation in education about the food we eat. It makes sense, it saves energy, it saves food miles, acknowledges the skills of the grower and offers better health to the nation. I would say that I spent yesterday planting tatties with primary school children in Hilton Primary School in Inverness, and the photographs are there to show the sheer pleasure and delight they had as they got their hands filthy.
I'm afraid I must ask you to come to a conclusion.
Planting tatties. I ask you to support the amendment. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now Colin Tavish Scott, 6 minutes, and I should say there's no time left to give back for intervention.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Ask not what you can do for your country, but instead ask what's for lunch, I think was Bruce Crawford's best line of the day. I thought for a horrible moment that he was quoting the First Minister, but I understand he quickly clarified that. Had never been any doubt that the First Minister eats for Scotland, but instead it turned out to be Orson Welles. But it certainly was the best and most appropriate food line of the day. This debate inevitably is one where local members take the opportunity to raise every possible delicacy from their particular part of the country. And I should just quickly add, just for Jean Urquhart's last and very earlier and rather salient point that the Fort Fish and Chip shop in Shetland, as Mr Stevenson was relating in his own patch, does not sell anything other than locally caught fish. But my point is the one that other members have reflected, and our concern across Scotland is that not enough of that is going on, and there maybe is an opportunity for the Minister. It seems to me, Deputy Presiding Officer, to have been two main issues in this debate. The first is around procurement, public sector procurement, because that's something government can actually do something about, as opposed to the broad spectrum of industry that is exporting, where government can help, but actually doesn't have the whip hand in terms of changing that. And secondly, the issue that Richard Simpson and others have raised in some detail around regulations and the right balance. There will always be that debate, whether it's on trans fats or on meat inspectors in meat plants or on the new food body that Michael Matheson, the Health Minister, made a statement to in Parliament a week or so ago. But that balance, I suspect, will be a continuing interest for Parliament. But in terms of food procurement and public procurement policy, the point I wanted to just address in closing was on whether that system benefits big business and the large concerns that we have heard much of in this debate, mentioned amongst others by Neil Findlay, or whether those regulations and that system can be altered to help, in particular, smaller businesses and smaller suppliers, which is very much the mood of today's contributions. It's important, I think, to look at the Scottish Government's own study into this, which was published last year, the Assessment of a Regional Cross-Sectoral Collaborative Approach to Public Sector Food Procurement. Maybe Mr Lockwood would come up with a snappier title for his studies in future. But what it did say, which I thought was important in this context, is, and I quote, "This study has reinforced the view that price is still the dominant factor within food procurement decisions, and this pressure is increasing, not decreasing, not changing, but increasing." So there is much there for government to address on how the, food procurement could be done on a regional basis from their own study. And that study went on to say that there is a general reluctance by many small businesses to engage in the food procurement system. The report sets out a number of good examples of local food procurement, not just in Scotland, but across the United Kingdom. But it did go on to say that there needs to be changes to our current structure of food procurement, strong support for small businesses and sizing contracts appropriately. Now, that all seems to me to be at the heart of what needs to change about the way in which food procurement currently goes on in public sector procurement, whether it's for our schools, our hospitals, our care homes, as other members have mentioned, or generally in terms of how that is done. And the Federation of Small Business as well, in a letter they wrote, no doubt to other members as well, but certainly the one I read last night, particularly highlights the importance of that, because they say that the recent aggregation of Scottish public sector contracts means that a small number of large businesses often win a great deal of public contracts. The food sector is no exception. So when the Federation of Small Business are making those observations, I'm sure the Minister is alive to that, and I'm sure the Minister would want to make considerable progress in the summit that I'm sure he wants to talk about in his winding up speech on what can be done. He also mentioned the Commonwealth Games and the fact that Glasgow 2014 is working with Scottish Food and Drink, I understand, to produce a Games food charter. 2 million meals will be served on 11 days of competition to showcase Scottish food, and the Ryder Cup too should surely follow that example, all but over 3 days rather than 11. But the question there is surely that the Scottish Government and its agencies should commit to such an approach for food procurement, and that local authorities should do the same. That would be a commendable move forward. Yes, of course.
Hanzala Malik. Could we have Hanzala Malik's microphone, please? Could you check your cards in properly, Mr Malik? Mr Malik, I'm sorry, you can't, because the official report can't hear you. Could you move down to the...
So I was rested by speech, God, isn't it?
Hanzala Malik.
Yes. Can Can we...
I'm very sorry. I mean, I can't allow the intervention without a
I'm sure the
microphone. We'll have
intervention
an
would have been well worth
investigation.
waiting for, and maybe there'll be. I'm sure Mr Lockhill will promote another food debate in a few weeks' time, and maybe the Labour Party will give Mr Malik a session.
Mr Scott, I'm afraid you're approaching the end of your time, and we don't have a lot of time left.
Maybe a little bit of time for all that.
Well, unfortunately, I can't conjure it out of the air so as quickly as possible.
It wasn't my fault, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I just make one final point about the debate around supermarkets as opposed to local food producers? Because I think Rob Gibson and other members rightly raised that with some feeling, I suspect, and it relates centrally to the point that Claire Bacon and others made right at the start, which is the choice that people have on their income levels that they're at. Now, supermarkets, one might describe as an unnecessary, or rather a necessary evil. But that is the context of this debate in terms of where people buy their food. And I hope in the winding up as well, the Minister will address what is a fundamental issue to so many people based on the income level that they actually have.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we really are short of time. Jamie McGrigor, 6 minutes.
Today's debate is indeed timely. We've had recognition of the crucial economic importance of Scotland's food and drink sector, which is a very big part of Scotland's export, and I agree with those sentiments which have been expressed. And I believe the sector can become an even more important part of our economy as we go forward. And I do congratulate the Cabinet Secretary for his efforts on the food and drink sector. In my own region, the Highlands and Islands, we have wonderful examples of genuinely world-class food producers, from famous names like Walkers of Aberlour, Baxters of Speyside, and of course the Scottish whisky industry, our finfish, our shellfish producers, producers of delicious cheeses, game products, to all those individual farmers and crofters who produce beef, lamb, mutton and pork. Our sea fishermen, of course, also harvest some of the best whitefish available. And the high quality of food in some of our hotels, restaurants and cafes is also a big attraction to visitors from the rest of the UK and abroad. I want to highlight the fish restaurants and cafes of Oban in Argyll, which have just improved out of all recognition in recent years. Graham Day talked about the Arbroath Smokies. I agree with him. They're delicious. Has he tasted Lochfine Kippers? Maureen Watt talked about those. My grandmother always told me that the best sausages came from Newmarket, and now I think perhaps I know why. Other members have discussed the recent scandal over horse meat in food products, and I believe that this focus can potentially help our farmers and crofters, since they do adhere to traceability systems which are some of the very best in the world. They're not perfect, but they're trying hard. We should pay tribute to our farmers and crofters for the efforts they have made in this regard over recent years, and Scottish consumers should have full confidence in Scottish meat products. The media must also report issues related to our food in as responsible a way as possible. I don't think they've been very good at that, I have to say, lately. Last week's study suggesting processed meats might lead to increased mortality probably alarmed many Scots who enjoy bacon and sausages. The study also found that small amounts of meat, even processed meat, had real health benefits, and we should all be aiming for a diet that is balanced. Surely that's the key. A little of what you fancy does you good. We support initiatives to increase the profile and availability of local food, and again believe this could benefit our primary producers. Scottish Crofting Federation's Crofting Charter highlights crofters' belief in the need for a strong local food economy with public procurement opportunities for local producers, as Tavish Scott rightly highlighted, and the promotion and encouragement of niche and high-end branding and marketing, for example, produce from rare and native breeds, is very important. The NFU's What's on Your Plate campaign has been running for over 3 years, and that's to be commended as well. There are lots of other food initiatives. Food from Argyll, which does a fantastic job promoting some of Argyll's best produce, including the very tasty Argyll lamb stovies, which are found at major events like Rock Ness, Belladrum's Tartan Heart, Tea in the Park. They're very modern, and the Highlands and Islands Food and Drink Awards, now in their 9th year, are a positive way indeed of showcasing examples of best practice within the sector. Now, we've heard much today quite rightly, about the high quality of Scotland's lamb, mutton, pork and beef. I'd also wish to highlight our wonderful venison. From both the wild and the farm deer sources, it's got less than 2% fat, which is less than skinless chicken. It is a good source of healthy protein, high in iron. It's got vitamins B6 and B12, potassium, phosphorus, riboflavin and niacin. And I would encourage local authorities to consider using venison. As my colleague here says, it also tastes quite good. Stuart Severson painted a glowing picture of the diet of his youth and the benefits of his father's country medical practice, and I thought that was wonderful. Unfortunately, NHS 24 aren't quite the same. But in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I'm getting there a bit soon, actually. We recognise the tremendous achievements of Scotland's vibrant food and drink sector and the potential for it to play a big part in growing Scotland's economy in the future. And we look to the government to work constructively with the industry, and this includes securing the best possible deal for our farmers and crofters and the key primary producers in the current CAP reform. And I wish them every bit of luck with that.
Thank you very much. I now call on Claudia Beamish. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll just highlight the fact that today in the cafeteria there was both salmon and beef, and I stood in front of them and dithered and couldn't try both, but never mind, there they were for us all to see, and of course a vegetarian option. We've heard many speeches this afternoon about how vitally important it is that we engage with the issues of food sourcing and of provision and rethink the structure of supply chains within Scotland. The ongoing horsemeat scandal has, of course, contributed heavily on this issue being debated in the Chamber today, and also labelling, as highlighted by my colleague Richard Simpson, is extremely important. Further, the complexities of global and trans-European supply chains are daunting to grapple with, and proper regulation is, of course, essential. As we heard from the Cabinet Secretary in his statement to the Chamber, the Scottish Government will now be setting up a food standards agency in Scotland. While I am certainly supportive of this measure, the question still remains as to why it has taken so long with a highly publicised scandal for the consultation to be called. As Scottish Labour has highlighted throughout this debate, there is now a need for a well-funded and robust regulatory regime and its implementation. And I highlight again the Unison survey in this context, and also place emphasis on the School Meals Summit with COSLA and the actions that the Scottish Government has taken because of this, and look forward to the Cabinet Secretary's comments on this in his closing remarks. Local food has also been highlighted by almost all members, and Graham Day gave a list of Angus foods, which is awesome, but so indeed is the same across Scotland. And Elaine Murray stressed the value of food to our tourism industry, which I don't think any of the motions or amendments stressed. I want to turn now to nutrition and the difficult issue of obesity in Scotland. It is a lamentable lack of nutrition in many people's diets, and the complexities and challenges of buying food on a low income that can often drive people into difficult food choices. There have been studies conducted by the Scottish Government and others which show a significant link between obesity, deprivation and indeed a lack of education. And the Scottish Government's National Health Survey, Obesity, states suggested mechanisms for socio-economic status affecting obesity include the cheap cost and palatability of poor quality, energy-dense foods appealing to those with limited income, and area-based density of fast food outlets. While this is but one extract from the report, this nonetheless suggests that improving nutritional education and tackling food poverty must be a priority for the Scottish Government, and I am sure the Cabinet Secretary has taken this on board even more from today's debate. The inescapable fact is that some of the most affordable foods can be of the poorest quality, I stress some, and the lowest nutritional value, and this is very difficult for families. I recognise Neil Findlay's global analysis, which set us all thinking, I'm sure. And importantly, Bruce Crawford highlighted the IF campaign to tackle hunger worldwide and Rob Gibson raised the importance of the issue of GM and the threat that it poses. In relation to food banks and food poverty is as serious a concern for many families across Scotland as fuel poverty is today. And as my colleague Jane Baxter and others have already discussed, many communities do not have access to high-quality foods. Better quality and healthier food should be made more available and cheaper, and this discussion should certainly and has been at the heart of today's debate. My colleague Elaine Murray has also highlighted this point, and I certainly agree with her that people living in food poverty must not in any way be blamed for not being able to afford many of the healthier, expensive foods. Recently, I met with Kirkton Church in Carluke, in my region, who are working with other churches in Clydesdale to support increasing numbers of people in urgent need of food. And Elaine Murray and Bruce Crawford stressed that the welfare reform agenda will only make things shockingly worse for these people. On health promotion, I want to be a little bit anecdotal, although I'm in a closing speech, because this Saturday, chaired by our Deputy Presiding Officer, we had an International Women's Day event here at the Scottish Parliament, and I met with a women's group from Kirkconnell in Dumfriesshire. They run a lifestyles group to help promote well-being, and they hold a come and taste meeting, and some of the group cook lunch with fresh ingredients while others do an exercise class. Then they share a healthy lunch and the recipe. There is also a voluntary weigh-in, which has encouraged weight management. This helps break down barriers by trying new menus without bearing the cost at home if the menu isn't to their taste. The popularity of TV food programmes is well known, yet how many of us actually cook in the real sense of the word, as Nigel Donne highlighted? Can the Cabinet Secretary tell the Chamber what the Scottish Government is doing specifically to support initiatives such as that in Kirkconnell? This brings me to discussing food procurement itself. It is now becoming increasingly clear that we should be encouraging the development of a continuing sustainable food strategy. Jane Baxter has already raised the quality v price debate, but I would like to ask the Cabinet Secretary, can we move towards regionally integrated food procurement and indeed local procurement where possible? I've been pleased to hear of examples from across Scotland, and Rob Gibson highlighted how collaboration is essential. Like Alison Johnson and Richard Simpson, I would like to draw attention to the Soil Association's Food for Life scheme, which is quickly gathering pace. And the aim of the scheme, for those members that don't know, is to transform food culture across the country, promoting sustainable supply of fresh, healthy, local, organic and seasonal food. This mark is already being used by 4 local authorities, including East Ayrshire. Alison Johnson argued for local to be the default position for schools, and I would agree with that. In the case of Edinburgh, their Food for Life partnership has been working in conjunction with Edinburgh Council, Nourish and Whitmill Farm in West Linton to develop a sustainable food strategy, which has at its heart a commitment to healthy food promotion, environmentalism and joint procurement. Indeed, the issue of food miles, which hasn't been raised very much today, is also a significant part of this debate on food policy. Sourcing local food not only ensures that it is fresher, it also reduces carbon emissions through transportation and, of course, helps local communities. According to the Scottish Government's own report, Food and Drink in Scotland, Key Facts 2012, there are, out of Scotland's population, 54% and 49% respectively said they would buy local to support local producers and retailers. These statistics show that there is certainly a public will for projects such as the Food for Life partnership, and I would urge the Scottish Government to do all it can to promote similar projects. Members have also stressed the significance of grow your own projects, allotments, the use of empty spaces, both urban and rural, and I would also highlight cooperative models in the context of food. Scotland has rich food resources, many of which are both healthy and delicious, and they must be safely shared by us all as well as exported. And the Cabinet Secretary used the word transformative in relation to food. The new Food Council will have much to take on, and I wish them well in that quest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Richard Lockhead to wind up the debate. Cabinet Secretary, you have until 5 o'clock.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Well, it's been an excellent debate with many good points made from across the Chamber, and although I can't necessarily agree with the amendments, I do agree with the vast majority of very good arguments put forward by
members of all parties in this debate, and it does show that this Parliament wants to go in the one direction in terms of making the most of the potential of the fact that Scotland can produce so much fantastic food, and we want all our people, their environment and wider society and our economy to benefit from that. I thought the debate got off to a good start when Alec Johnson referred to myself as a young man. That was the first time in a long time that phrase has been associated with myself, but I very much welcomed it. And of course we learnt a lot about people's eating habits in terms of beetroot ice cream in Fife, which the member from Fife mentioned. Of course, Maureen Watt mentioned the alternative to English breakfast, which was porridge followed by a broth smokies, which certainly got my stomach rumbling, and many other good products were mentioned across the chamber as well. And indeed, people, of course, went to good length to praise their local food businesses, food and drink businesses in their constituencies, which play such a crucial role locally, but on behalf of the whole nation as well. And certainly, if you want to invite me to come along and visit these businesses personally, so I can taste the fantastic food and drink around the country, even more than I have been over these last few years, I'll very much take up those offers. The purpose of the debate, of course, has been to reflect upon the recent horsemeat scandal, but also just to talk about the wider food debate that's taking place. The horsemeat scandal perhaps focuses our minds on some of the big issues out there, but the food policy goes back to 2007, and much has been achieved since then. And some of these achievements span the full width of the policy, from food education to industry growth, to health, the environment, all of which involve a huge range of people and partnerships. I really want to use this opportunity to thank all of these people, the length and breadth of this country, who are involved in making many of these achievements happen. If it wasn't for the talents of the entrepreneurs, of the primary producers, of fishermen, or farmers, or crofters, the men and women who work in the factories of all sizes, some of these may be multinationals, some of them may be local, smaller factories and businesses, and of course the many people working at the front line in many of our communities, delivering food, trying to give access to good, nutritious food for many communities, particularly people in low incomes and the vulnerable. They are the people who are driving our food revolution and making our food and drink policy come alive. They are the people who are making our food and drink industry a huge success, and by doing so helping Scotland's sustainable economic growth. So I'm sure you all agree there are many dedicated individuals out there, and we owe them a lot. And today, hopefully, has given us the opportunity to recognise their growing interest in food and drink, which is reflected in many initiatives throughout the country. And indeed, I was thinking about how if you go to any agricultural show or big event in Scotland these days, usually there's a waiting list for companies into the food tent, and they're very, very popular locations now, the food tents at all these events, another sign of the food revolution that's taking place. Of course, today has allowed us to debate the implications of the horsemeat fiasco and raise awareness of the high standards of sourcing and provenance which exist in Scotland today. And I think it's important that we do talk up Scottish produce, and we don't allow the Scottish brand to become collateral damage of a horsemeat fiasco, the seeds of which were sown on the European continent and not here in Scotland. It does mean we should not be complacent, of course it doesn't, but we have to recognise that that is what we're talking about.
Hanzala Malik.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer and the Chamber, for allowing me to come back again, this time mic working. I just want to reiterate what the Cabinet Secretary says about protecting the Scottish brand, and in particular what's happening in terms of the misleading marketing of products coming from overseas, damaging not only our own economy but actually putting our own economy at risk. And therefore I'm wondering if the Cabinet Secretary would agree with me that we need stiffer penalties against companies who do this, who mislead people, who try to profit from misleading people, and also perhaps look at somehow taking measures in terms of removing export licences for companies who do that to us.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think once the investigations are complete in Europe, we expect the European authorities to throw the book at those responsible for this food fraud that's been taking place, and that's certainly something I support. I was listening to Claire Baker's speech closely. I think she made many important points, and I recognise that. I do think it tended to dwell on the negative when there are so many positive things to celebrate in the Scottish food sector at the moment. But I do recognise there are serious issues highlighted by Labour spokesperson in this debate. But there is local food in our schools. We should recognise that. Still Hungry for Success is a very important initiative. I mentioned in my opening remarks that initiative is being refreshed. It's meeting for the first time this week, and hopefully it will pick up, as we expect it to do so, on many of the themes that have emerged from this debate today. And I should point out that the Association of Public Service Excellence also say that we spend more per school meal in Scotland than anywhere else in the UK in terms of the food content of those meals. Even my own authority, Murray Council, were in the newspapers in my constituency just in the last couple of weeks, explaining how the meat that's served in school meals in schools in my constituency are sourced from our butchers and forests. So it's very important that we explode some of the myths that have perhaps infiltrated into the media and in some members' minds in this chamber over the last few weeks in terms of the scale of this issue.
Sorry, Claire Baker. Thank you for taking an intervention. Can the Cabinet Secretary say, following on from last week's summit, if there will be a reconsideration of the balance between quality and cost, where at the moment quality is only a third of the balance of what the cost is?
Cabinet Secretary, could we have order in the chamber, please?
Well, as I said, the Still Hungry for Success initiative is now going to look at how to continue the school meals revolution in our schools in the weeks and months ahead. And it was discussed at the meeting, of course, to take on board any lessons that can be learnt from the last few weeks in terms of the horse meat scandal, in terms of sourcing and other factors. But we should recognise that school meals served in Scotland are of quality, they are traceable, and therefore we should celebrate that in this debate, not perpetuate any myths that may be out there. And of course, I was delighted that some members mentioned the Food for Life initiative, which has been a standard bearer of quality in many Scottish schools. Very briefly.
Alec Johnston.
Taking into account the Minister's mention of the sourcing of materials in forests, would he acknowledge that there is a failure to understand in some quarters that the cheapest and the most expensive cuts can come from the same carcass, and if properly sourced, it can be cost-effective, high-quality beef? And while companies like McDonald's recognise and exploit this commercially, it seems to be beyond the understanding of the Green Party.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think our guiding principle should be sourced in Scotland and sourced close to home, and that's something I will continue to support. In terms of the horse meat scandal, Richard Simpson mentioned the whole issue of food safety and quite rightly highlighted that we've made great progress in recent years in Scotland in addressing food safety issues. And it's important that we remain vigilant, but we have made that progress. But the horse meat scandal is not generally a food safety issue, it's about food fraud in Europe. There are now 23 countries across the continent involved in this issue who have been affected by it. And we do not, as I said before, want the Scottish brand, the very popular, strong Scottish brand, ending up being collateral damage because of debates taking place in this country because of a scandal that's happened in Europe. We should celebrate the Scottish label and celebrate the Scottish brand, and I'm glad that some members have done that today. But of course, in addressing some of these issues, the new food standards body will be consulted upon, and all members will get their opportunity to have their say. And I can tell the Chamber, as Michael Matheson did, that promoting food safety and safeguarding food safety will be the central function, of course, of the new food safety body. Sure, last intervention.
Dr Simpson.
I wonder if he would also take forward the Food Standards Agency for Scotland's recommendation that folic acid should be a mandatory part of bread, because folic acid prevents neural tube abnormalities, and that's something we can support health on in Scotland. We need to move forward on that issue.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'll happily pass on those remarks to the Health Minister. Many members called for more regulation, more regulation, more regulation. Whilst we can't rule anything out at this stage, of course, we have to be careful when we talk about more regulation, more regulation. We do not want Scottish companies, particularly small businesses involved in the food sector, put out of business because of a burden of regulation, because of criminal fraud that's happening on the European continent. That would not do our own economy any favours, or our own food sector any favours whatsoever. So we don't want to put Scottish businesses out of business, and we have to make sure that our response to this whole issue is proportionate. In terms of Brand Scotland, many members spoke about the value of that to our economy. We have a fantastic image in this country and overseas, a clean, green image, an image of a fantastic natural environment that produces the fantastic raw materials that underpin our globally successful food and drink industry. Graham Day, other members talked that up. We also talked up the need for ensuring that the Common Fisheries Policy, the Common Agricultural Policy negotiations underway at the moment protect the need for food security in this country and throughout Europe. And it's really important we do get a fair deal for Scotland's farmers, fishermen and crofters who supply these raw materials that underpin our successful food and drink industry. But the export markets, which many members referred to as well, do offer tremendous opportunities. When I was in Japan and China leading the food and drink delegation and hearing distributors, chefs, others in these countries saying that the best produce they've experienced from anywhere in the whole of the planet comes from Scotland. We should take enormous pride in that. That is fantastic feedback from these very important markets. When you think that 70% of people in China are going to be in the middle class by 2030, that is a big market opportunity for our companies here in this country. There are many, many other issues that were covered by members. I've run out of time to cover them, other than saying that we have to recognise that globally there are many challenges to be faced. The forecast increase in global population from 7 billion to 9 billion people by 2050 will put increased demand on our resources, and we have to safeguard our precious resources in this country so we can make sure we support our food and drink sector in the times ahead. Food and drink is a passion that I know many of you share. As I draw to a conclusion, that is why this debate has highlighted many of the positive stories, but yes, difficult challenges. But working together, we can build on the success of Scotland's first ever national food and drink policy and make this nation a good food nation. I urge members to support the motion.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate on Scottish Government food policy. I do need to apologise for an earlier technical issue with our microphones, which happily has now been resolved, I'm pleased to tell the Chamber. We now move on to the next item of business, and that is decision time. And there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. Can I remind members that in relation to the debate on the Scottish Government food policy, if the amendment in the name of Claire Baker is agreed, then the amendment in the name of Alison Johnston falls. The first question is that Amendment 5892.3 in the name of Claire Baker, which seeks to amend motion number 5892 in the name of Richard Lochhead on Scottish Government food policy, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed, and therefore we will move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now, please. The result of the vote on amendment number 5892.3 in the name of Claire Baker is yes 37, no 63, and there were 15 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 5892.1 in the name of Tavish Scott, which seeks to amend motion number 5892 in the name of Richard Lochhead on Scottish Government food policy, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. Therefore, we will move to a vote, and members should please cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 5892.1 in the name of Tavish Scott is yes 54, no 61. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. That brings us to the third question, which is that amendment 5892.2 in the name of Alison Johnston, which seeks to amend motion number 5892 in the name of Richard Lochhead on Scottish Government food policy, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. Therefore, we will move to a vote. Members should please cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 5892.2 in the name of Alison Johnson is yes 9, no 74, and there were 32 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed, which brings us to the fourth question, which is that motion 5892 in the name of Richard Lockhead on Scottish Government food policy be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is therefore agreed. That concludes decision time, and we will now move on to members' business. And I would ask members who are leaving the chamber to do so quietly, please. I wasn't expecting.